There may be more ahead. Do not go away.
It is 8 p.m. on the East Coast, 5 p.m. on the West. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Judy Woodruff, along with my colleagues Jeff Greenfield and Bernard Shaw, and we know we have calls to make. Polls are closing at this hour in 16 states in the District of Columbia. The first call CNN makes at this hour is in the state of Maryland. This is Parris Glendening, the Democratic incumbent, holding on against a very fierce challenge from the Republican Ellen Sauerbrey, her second try. Texas Governor George W. Bush, a man we're looking at for the year 2000, holds on. No surprise here. He defeats Land Commissioner Gary Morrow.
In Maine, the governor, Angus King, keeps his chair. The incumbent defeats a rather... Well, anyway, Angus King has won the governorship in Maine. In Alabama, incumbent Richard Shelby, he goes back to the Senate, defeating Clayton Sudduth. In Connecticut, no surprise here. Christopher Dodd, the incumbent, turns back a challenge by the independent Gary Franks, who was in Congress.
And in Kansas, Senator Sam Brownback easily defeating Paul Feliciano Jr. He returns to the Senate. That's a hold for the Republicans. And in the Maryland Senate, another easy win for Senator Barbara Mikulski, small in stature, largely in politics. Oklahoma Senate, an easy win for Senator Don Nickles, defeating Don Carroll, a hold for the Republicans.
In the state of Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter goes back to Washington, wanting a fourth term. The Republican, he defeated the Democrat Bill Lloyd. In the state of Connecticut, John Rowland holds on. He's the Republican, defeating longtime 8-term Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Kennelly. In Kansas, Bill Graves, the incumbent, wins a nod from his voters, defeating the Democrat Tom Sawyer.
In Michigan, incumbent John Engler turned back a challenge from Jeffrey Feigert. In Oklahoma, the incumbent Frank Keating, very popular there, defeated Laura Boyd's challenge. In Pennsylvania, another incumbent winning tonight, Republican Tom Ridge turning back Ivan Itkin.
And in Tennessee, Governor Don Sundquist, the incumbent, defeats perennial candidate John J. Hooker to hold that seat for the Republicans. One of the closest and most watched races in the country is the Illinois Senate race. Carol Mausley-Brown, one of the more vulnerable Democrats. We're going to hear now from CNN's Jeff Flock, who is in Chicago. Jeff?
Well, Jeff, a little bit ago, it looked like she was done. The last significant poll in this race had it 48-38 for Peter Fitzgerald, the Republican challenger. But now things are looking very, very different. Let's take a look at Carol Mausley-Brown as she voted earlier today and tell you some of the latest numbers. The campaign has been looking at results of exit polls which indicate that this race may be a lot closer than they thought. Mike Briggs is press secretary to the senator. What are you hearing about turnout?
What I'm hearing about turnout is that it's very good in Chicago, 56%.
Which would help the senator.
Which would help the senator for sure. And those polls you were talking about have been moving in her direction for the last week or so.
What about African-American turnout?
African-American turnout is up. The African-American community was revved up by Reverend Jackson, who had several rallies for her, and also with the help of First Lady Hillary Clinton, who came in to Operation Push last weekend.
That was a big focus to get that.
That was a big focus to get that because both Reverend Jackson and the First Lady helped us emphasize the issues that matter to people in Illinois, so the election became a referendum on what counts to them: gun control, abortion, choice, health care.
Okay, Mike Briggs, appreciate it. We'll be back at you later in the evening. A lot closer, it looks like, than perhaps it was thought to be. We'll continue to watch it, Judy.
A lot to keep our eye on. Thank you, Jeff. Well, there is a former president this evening and his wife who must be very happy indeed because they have not one son who's a governor, but two sons. We've already reported Jeb Bush, the winner in the state of Florida, and we've just called in the state of Texas, George W. Bush will be reelected to the governorship in that state. Let's go to Charles Ziwi in Austin. Charles.
Judy, you know, the kind of coalition that George W. Bush put together here in Texas is the kind of coalition that his people hope to replicate if and when he decides to run for president, it's looking more and more like he'll make that decision sometime in the early part of next year, depending on how the lieutenant governor's race goes here, and I'll get to that in a second. Again, the governor has for his entire first term here been a coalition governor, appealing to Democrats as much as Republicans. He's put together that kind of coalition in the state legislature, been very popular with Democrats. In fact, Democrats here in Texas have been in disarray, have been had a hard time coming up with any candidate to run against Bush, especially when he was polling in the 70th percentile in the polls here. Now, our exit polling here of Texas voters today showed some very interesting things that confirm that coalition theory. Bush appealed to about 26% of Democrats. He drew about 26% of the vote from Democratic voters. And along with that, he got about 46% of the Hispanic vote, again, according to the exit poll. That's a key, according to the Bush people, in their national appeal. The governor openly courted the Hispanic vote here, gave a number of speeches in Spanish, did news conferences in Spanish, and openly went after the Hispanic vote and got a big chunk of it tonight. Now, on top of that, the Christian conservatives across the country, while they were at times uncomfortable with the governor's father, President Bush, they are very comfortable with the son, George Bush. They gave him about 100% of their support in our exit poll tonight, meaning that this is someone as a candidate who appeals to a wide cross-section of people, and the Bush people hope that that is exactly the strategy that they'll use in a national campaign. Judy?
Okay, thanks very much, Charles Ziwi there in Texas. Just before we move on, I want to point out that we said independent Governor Angus King of Maine won a second term tonight. He was opposed by Democrat Thomas Connolly and Republican James Longley Jr. Now, our basket is filling up. Frank Sesno, what's the latest on the balance of power?
Our job is to put it in perspective here, Bernie, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the governors because this is shaping up so far anyway to be a very good night for the Democrats. Coming into this evening, as you can see in the state houses, there were 32 Republican governors, 17 Democrats. Not all of them faced re-election. 24 Republicans did, 11 Democrats faced re-election. The evening has progressed. There you can see the number of Republicans, 8, and Democrats, 6, who did not face re-election. So far, there are 8 elected Republicans. Our new totals, let me jump right ahead, 14 Republicans and 13 Democrats. New totals. Gene Meserve, we've been following the governors very closely. South Carolina, Alabama, and Maryland for the Democrats.
Very big pickups, particularly Alabama and South Carolina. These were Republican conservative states that had Republican incumbents. Democrats have unseated them. In both cases, you found Democratic candidates who got traction by proposing a lottery to fund public education. Because these races were close, both parties were trying to mobilize their bases. The Democrats trying to get out the African Americans, the Republicans trying to get out the religious conservatives, and let's see how those votes played out. In South Carolina, Jim Hodges got 92% of the African American vote. David Beasley only got 6%. And amongst religious conservatives, Beasley did get 75%, but Hodges picked up 23%. And of those responding to our exit poll, 60% said they favored the lottery, showing that the lottery there was indeed a cutting issue. In Alabama, the situation is a little bit different. There, Don Siegelmen did pick up 96% of the African American vote. Fob James, only 4% of white religious. It was 26 Siegelmen, 74 James. 51% favored the lottery, indicating there were other factors there, perhaps some disaffection with the conservative Fob James. Frank?
Very interesting. And Parris Glendening, by the way, in Maryland, hanging on the Democrat, a very Democratic state. Glendening had a real shadow dance as to how to deal with President Clinton early on. In the end, he embraced him, and he will now be beholden to him. Now we want to move on to the Senate, where there are a lot of close races still outstanding. Coming into this evening, 55 Republicans, 45 Democrats in the United States Senate. Up for grabs, 16 of those Republican seats, 18 of the Democratic seats. Now, 39 Republicans, 27 Democrats did not face re-election, so they're at home, we presume, watching this very broadcast. So far tonight, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats have won, according to our numbers, the exit polls and the results. Bruce Morton, the tight races really tell the story.
Well, the tight race that we've just not called, the state's polls just closed, of course, is Illinois, where Carol Mausley-Brown has spent the entire campaign trying to get the voters to talk about almost anything except her. talk about education, talk about HMO reform, just don't talk about me. But the Republican, State Senator Peter Fitzgerald, has been very successful. He's kept himself out of sight, kept the campaign focused on her. How many times did you hang out with the dictator of Nigeria? What about these alleged irregularities in your campaign finances? All of that kind of thing. And if she can pull this out, it will be because she finally got them thinking about something else.
And she took a page right out of Bill Clinton's playbook, by the way, because she went to her voters, looked in the camera, and said, sorry, I've made some mistakes. Let's focus on the issues. Stu Rothenberg, let's focus on the House. There are some very interesting races to call.
Frank, we have 3 races to call now. I thought we had 2, but a third one just came in. In the Lexington area, this is Democrat Scotty Bassler's open seat. Republican Ernie Fletcher has won. He's defeated Democratic Ernesto Scorsone. Scorsone, a liberal Democrat in the primary, a multi-candidate field. He squeezed through, something of a surprise. The Republicans have picked up the seat. And just coming in the other Kentucky seat, in northeastern Kentucky, Republican Jim Bunning's seat has gone Democratic to Ken Lucas. And over in Indianapolis, Julia Carson, a African-American Democrat thought to be in serious trouble, has held on against Republican Gary Hofmeister, a conservative challenger.
And we should point out that coming into this evening, all 435 representatives in the House of Representatives up for re-election. The Republicans holding the edge, 228-206 to 1 independent who is outstanding. We also want to declare a winner while we're on the subject. We were talking about governors. This is a big one for the Democrats. Don Siegelmen in the state of Alabama beating Fob James, the incumbent Republican. This now official, which we bring to you right here and now. And we're going to go back to the national desk and Bernie.
There's so much more to come, and when we return, more on the races, more on the poll closings, and more on CNN.
Welcome back to CNN's continuing coverage of Election 98. We are joined now by 2 gentlemen who have plied their trade in Washington on different sides of the aisle, providing perspective, analysis, and dare one might say spin from time to time. We're joined by Tony Blankley, who was Communications Director or Press Secretary for Speaker Newt Gingrich, and Mike McCurry in his first televised appearance as a civilian, former Communications Director for President Clinton. Tony Blankley, it's a little early, I know, but so far we've had Republican losses for governor in Alabama and South Carolina, if our projections are right. An endangered Democrat, Ernest Hollings, holds on, and we are reporting too close to call in 3 races the Republicans wanted: Illinois Senate, Missouri Senate, and Georgia Senate. How do you spin that for the Republicans?
Well, look, my sense is, as you say, it's early in the evening, but I think that Michael is going to be trying to suppress a little bit of a smirk tonight. I don't think it's going exactly the way the Republicans hope. I think depending on how these close races break, it could still be a satisfactory night for the Republicans. But my sense is that the next couple of days, there will be a battle of messages, who's got the mandate. The Democrats are likely to do a little better on that, but I think the fundamentals, assuming that Republicans pick up some seats in the Senate, some in the House, some governorships, are still going to be improving for the Republicans, but it's not going to feel that way for the next 48 hours.
Michael, were you back in your old job, and I'm not wishing that on you, do you suspect the White House is beginning to suspect that they may have that they will not have to spin tonight, that they might actually have some good news to crow about?
I think they're going to be smiling there. Of course, they already have good news already. These are pretty surprising results coming in the South. You know, the White House strategy was to make sure the president helped candidates get the resources they need to run effective campaigns and then basically stay out of the way, create an environment in which people could use their own local use of issues to raise their own profiles. Now, that apparently happened in South Carolina. Remember, the president was stressing education in those days before the election. In South Carolina, that was apparently one of the key factors in an upset win there. Parris Glendening in Maryland, stressing education, has done quite well, a state where President Clinton visited often after kind of an interesting little back and forth early on. So I think they've used the president effectively to set the right tone for this. We'll see how things develop tonight, but I imagine they're having a lot of smiles down there. Well, just a couple of thoughts. None of the losses so far tonight, I think, are unexpected. And I think when you look at each race is based on very individual factors: gambling in one state, possible adultery for one candidate. These are not national issues, so I think it's going to be important for the 2 national parties to not draw too many inferences from a lot of hand-to-hand battles that perhaps one party is going to win a few more than the other. I don't know that it's much of an indicator for the future, but I suspect that
Clinton's people are not going to underplay the night.
Well, Tony and Mike, I want to ask both of you whether there will be, and whether there should be any second guessing now on the part of the Republicans, especially the people around Speaker Gingrich, who decided to run those Clinton-Lewinsky suggestive ads that ran in several districts in these southern states.
Judy, I was very surprised to see Ralph Reed quoted today saying that Newt Gingrich's fate is on the line. I think that is a warning sign from the far right of the party that there will be some accounting for. Remember, in these elections, when a president is in the 6th year, historically, the president's party loses seats. It would be quite unprecedented for the Democrats to hold their losses as low as they look like they may be tonight. Down at the White House, the message of the night is we're beating the spread, and I think it looks like they're going to do that.
Tony, was it a mistake to run those ads?
I don't think so. I mean, it's too early to tell. We've got to see how the election plays out in those districts where they were run. They weren't run in that many districts. And it's always a question of compared to what? You know, did it help but not enough? Did it help enough? We're going to have to wait for, I think, probably 2-3 hours before we're going to know the full play. Just one response to Michael, when he was saying that usually the president loses badly in the 6th year, we had the phenomena that this president managed to lose really badly in his 2nd year, and so an awful lot of potential Democratic seats were taken off the table back in '94 when Newt and the Republicans took over. So there was never as much on the table. Usually a president takes sort of 6 years to screw up enough to get everybody angry at him, and Clinton was able to do it in the first 2, and then has played a pretty good hand since then.
Score blankly the point on that one.
Tony Blankley, it's Frank Sesno here. I want to jump in. I had breakfast with your former boss not very long ago, Newt Gingrich, and he said going into this election very confidently that Bill Clinton's legacy coming out of this night would be as the man who lost the Roosevelt majority. Did he overstate his hand?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you look at the state legislatures, which are divided 48-48. My guess is, we haven't heard any numbers yet, my guess is we're going to pick up a few of those. We're going to probably pick up a few governors. We're probably going to pick up a few Senate seats, a few House seats. There's no question that the Democratic Party is moving from having been the historic majority party to having been in parity to now slipping into minority status.
Yeah, but remember, the predictions from the Speaker at one point were that the Republicans would gain as many as 40 seats in this election. Doesn't look like the election's going that direction.
And the predictions of the Democrats about 6 months ago was that they were going to take back the House, and that's not going to happen. It's always a question of where you measure the expectations from. If you measure them from a couple of weeks ago, it's looking even. If it's measuring from a month ago, the Democrats look good. If you measure it from January 1st, then it looks like a pretty good night for Republicans. So the question is, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think if you look where the White House thought they were going to be at the beginning of the general election campaign back on Labor Day, they have to be pretty pleased with the way things are going tonight so far.
2 quick questions. Tony Blankley, how can Republicans feel good about what's going on right now when CNN is saying that in Missouri, incumbent Republican Senator Kit Bond is in a race for his life with Democrat Jay Nixon? That race is too close to call.
Well, that's why I said at the beginning that I think Michael will have a little bit of a smirk, or suppress a smirk on his face. Obviously, Bond had trouble earlier. We thought he was safe. It's obviously going to be a fight tonight, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. That's why all of these close Senate races could still turn out pretty well for Republicans, but it might not, and we'll have to see.
Well, Attorney General Jay Nixon, of course, was one of the early recruits that the Senate was very proud of. The Senate Democrats were proud of bringing into the race. It may just be that in some of these cases, the Democrats are running more effective campaigns, and that their stress on issues like education, like on health care, has made a difference.
Would you say that Carol Mausley-Brown in a race too close to call, Republican Peter Fitzgerald, very wealthy?
Well, I think
Let me interrupt you, Mike, just a moment. CNN is making a call now. In Missouri, Senator Christopher Kit Bond has emerged from a tough challenge by Democrat Jay Nixon. Kit Bond has won re-election in that tough Senate race that we were just talking about.
Score 1 for Blankley.
So, Tony Blankley, with a smile on your face, let me ask this quick question of Mike McCurry. Carol Mausley-Brown fighting for political life in Chicago. Mrs. Clinton's campaign for her, so has the vice president.
Well, that race everyone knew was going to be very close, and she had a very, very difficult set of issues that she had to contend with. I think that she was listed by the Republican Senate Campaign Committee as a goner as late as 2 weeks ago. So the fact that she's fought back and is apparently in a very close race, I think, has got and to show that at least there's some momentum. that developed late in this campaign that helped candidates like Carol Mausley-Brown. Remember that the White House stress in the recent days has been on turnout, 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 and it looks like that they may have helped boost their party's chances by bringing more voters to the polls.
Okay, Mike McCurry, Tony Blinkley, good to have you contributing to our coverage tonight. Don't go away. We're coming back to you, as will Judy Woodruff and Jeff Greenfield. Back in a moment from CNN election headquarters in Atlanta.
Thank you. Hi, we're back, and we want to mention something to avoid, well, you have to be polite. They're in their living rooms and bedrooms and God knows where else. Tony Blankley's point needs underscoring. It is 8:26 on the East Coast, 5:26 in the West. Most of the polls are still open. We've only called a few races. Clearly there was some good news for Democrats, but it is very true that many of these races, even now, are close. They could all tip to the Republicans, so we want to be very careful about not characterizing this night before we know how the night has actually gone. But Bill Schneider, the fact that Carol Mausley-Brown is in a race too close to call when the polls were so much against her in weeks past, that has to tell us something. What does it tell you about the year of the woman in trouble?
Well, the year of the woman, of course, 1992, was a year when the Clarence Thomas hearings had made a lot of women angry, including Carol Mausley-Brown. That's the year she decided to run against the incumbent Democrat in her own state. And she, of course, was elected on a heavy woman's vote. The gender gap remains key to that race. Let's take a look at how it's going. Men voted in Illinois today for Peter Fitzgerald, the Republican. But women, here's the vote among women. They are voting for Carol Mausley-Brown, 54% of them. They're sticking with her, but she got 58% of the women's vote in 1992. That's one of the main reasons why this race is so close. Now, here's an interesting switch on the gender gap. In Maryland, for governor, Ellen Sauerbrey, undisputably a woman, but also a Republican, was defeated in that race. Men voted for the woman, Ellen Sauerbrey. She's the Republican. Women voted for the man. They voted for Parris Glendening, the incumbent governor. And in that race, he got 60%, quite a striking level of support from women in Maryland. That was higher than he did in 1994, which was not the year of the woman, but the year of the Republican, when Sauerbrey virtually beat him in that race. By the way, one more thing we're finding very interesting. Kit Bond, we've announced, has been reelected senator from Missouri. One of the key factors in his victory was that he ended up with a phenomenal 45% of the African-American vote for the Republican Kit Bond in Missouri. Why is that? Because the Democrat, Jay Nixon, had alienated a lot of African-American voters as Attorney General with his policies on desegregation. Kit Bond also did something else quite remarkable. There was no gender gap, unusual for a Republican these days. He got 54% of support from men, and he also won 54% from women. It's no longer the year of the woman. Why not? Well, in large part, there were angry voters in 1992, a poor economy, the Clarence Thomas confirmation, and when people are looking, when they're angry, they look for an outsider. Women make perfect outsider candidates, and that's one of the reasons why Carol Mausley-Brown and other women got elected. This year, angry voters, the people are not there. They're not angry. There's not much of a market for outsiders this year. Therefore, women candidates find themselves in much more trouble than they did 6 years ago. Bernie?
Bill Schneider, there is a market for tension in the state of New York. The polls close in 31 minutes. A very tough race there. Our man, Gene Randall.
Bernie, both Republican Senator Al D'Amato and his Democratic challenger Chuck Schumer enter their campaigns with a very public show of confidence. In fact, going into this day, very few things were less sure than the results of the Senate election in New York.
That's it. All right. Come on.
Looking for his fourth term in the Senate, D'Amato voted this morning on Long Island. The final pre-election polls at best showed him in a dead heat with Chuck Schumer. Still, D'Amato, grandson in arms, sounded upbeat.
Alphonse Murphy, that's a tough one for a kid to live with. And it's a great day, and we're going to have a great win.
Schumer, a 9-term congressman, voted with his youngest daughter in Brooklyn. His aim, piling up a sizable margin in New York City and cutting into D'Amato's strength in suburban and upstate areas.
I would have liked more time to get that message out, but let me tell you, I think it has gotten out. And there's momentum on our side.
It was a very negative campaign on both sides, so negative, in fact, maybe the toughest thing to imagine at this point is either Schumer or D'Amato at some point tonight delivering a concession speech in which the winner is congratulated. Bernie?
Gene Randall. More coverage on this election night. Back in a moment.
The voters this year have heard a lot of promises, and some of them it is safe to say will not be kept. So what are politicians to do when they have to explain that? Two quick historical lessons here. One of President Franklin Roosevelt's aides pointed out to him that a policy he was about to announce directly conflicted with a promise he made while campaigning in Pittsburgh. What should I do, FDR asked one of his advisors, and one of them answered, deny you were ever in Pittsburgh. And when Louisiana Governor Earl Long was confronted by a press aide asking how he could possibly explain why the governor was breaking a cast-iron campaign promise, Governor Long said simply, tell him I lied. Poll closing coming up, some calls and some uncalls, races that are too close to call. This is a very fascinating election night, and we'll be back with it in just a moment. It is 8:33 in the east. It is 5:33 in the west. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, this is Election 98. I'm Jeff Greenfield. I'm with Judy Woodruff and Bernard Shaw. We've got some calls and some updates to make. In Arkansas, we are projecting that the winner of the open Senate seat is Blanche Lincoln, the Democrat. That is a hold. She defeats Faye Bozeman. In the governor's race, Governor Mike Huckabee, who succeeded to the office when Governor Tucker was convicted of criminal behavior, he holds on to that seat. He defeats Democrat Bill Bristow.
Now we want to do a rundown of some of the races, Jeff and Bernie, where the polls have closed, but where the results are still in doubt. So we're keeping a very close eye on these places. In the state of Kentucky, we said this one was going to go on all night long. It looks like it just may do that. Look how close that is, with 2/3 of the precincts reporting. Just 2,000, not even 2,000 votes separate the Republican Jim Bunning from the Democrat Scotty Basler. This one's close. In North Carolina, look at this one. 17% of the precincts reporting John Edwards, the Democrat, at this point has a slight edge over Lauch Faircloth. It's still early, but very close.
And so far, with 4% of the precincts having reported Georgia Senate races, still very, very close. Coverdell with 55%, Challenger Coles 44%. Here in the gubernatorial race, 4% of the precincts ends. You can see how it adds up here. Barnes 52%, Milner 42%, 3% from Cashin. Milner spent a lot of money on this race.
In the Illinois Senate race, Senator Carol Mausley-Brown, the single most endangered Democrat, going in, locked in a tight fight with Peter Fitzgerald. We are saying that race is too close to call. In the Missouri Senate race, we have declared, I believe, CNN has declared that Kit Bond will be the winner over Attorney General Jay Nixon when all the votes are in. We had originally said that was too close to call. And in the Illinois governor's race, we have not yet made a call. Glenn Poshard, the conservative Democrat, trying to become the first governor elected since 1972 on the Democratic line against George Ryan.
Another one in doubt in the state of Ohio, the governor's race, the Democrat, Mr. Fisher, the Republican, Bob Taft. This one too close to call. In Massachusetts, another very close one, evidently. Governor Paul Cellucci, fighting to keep that office against a challenge by Democrat Scott Harshbarger. Too close.
Now let's check in with our balance of power desk to see exactly what this means. Frank, we have more to chew on.
Well, we do, Bernie, and we should start with the state of Illinois. That's what we want to focus on for just a moment here, because what happens with Carol Mausley-Brown will have a lot to say about the balance of power tonight, also about the balance of power going forth, because she was considered by far, the Democrats' most vulnerable senator, sort of a mirror image of President Clinton, if you will, in terms of her troubles ethically and how she needed to talk to her voters. The last Republican, rather, elected in Illinois was 1978, Charles Percy. Bruce Morton, you've been looking closely at this race. Your thoughts as to what's going on here? It's close.
It's too close to call, but Mausley-Brown's trouble throughout has been that the campaign focused on her, on visits to the late Nigerian dictator Sani Abacha, on alleged irregularities about her campaign finances. And the result is that when our exit pollers ask people what's the most important issue in the Senate race, really unusual answer. Usually it's the economy, taxes, ethics. 23% said ethics. That is not good news for Mausley-Brown, because in another question, when we asked, do you think she is ethical, 62% said no, 31% said yes. Now, 40-something% thought the Republican was unethical too, but she's still in worse trouble on this most important question than he is.
Bruce, the Democrats poured money into Illinois to try to save Mausley-Brown, over $3.5 million. Hillary Clinton went there. Twice. She hit on the education issue. She hit on the abortion issue. They really pulled out all the stops.
They tried as hard as they could, thinking, probably correctly, that if they could get the campaign to be about those things, about education, about abortion, if they could show how conservative Fitzgerald really was, Illinois is a moderate state by and large, whichever party wins an election, they could do it. And, you know, maybe they've come close. I don't know.
Okay, Bruce Morton will be watching closely as the Democrats try to make Illinois a mirror on their laboratory from Washington. Let's go back to the national desk.
All right, Frank Sesno and Bruce Morton. We've got many more races to keep an eye on. We're going to continue to do that. We'll be back in just a moment. An increasingly powerful factor in the Republican Party is the religious right, the Christian right. We want to go to Bill Schneider now. Bill, have you been able to look at some of these exit polls? Give us a sense of how much of a factor is the Christian right in the results that we're looking at tonight?
Well, you know, Judy, in politics they say your base are the people who are with you when you're wrong. They're the people who vote for you no matter what. African Americans are clearly the base of the Democratic Party. They voted for George McGovern in 1972 when very few other people did. They voted for Walter Mondale in 1984 when no one else did. Is the religious right now the base of the Republican Party? The religious right voted for George Bush for president in 1992. They were more loyal to the Republican Party even than wealthy voters. Today, the religious right voted 3/4 for David Beasley in South Carolina. He lost. They voted 3/4 for Fob James in Alabama, where he lost. Let's take a look at Florida, where the religious right played a very critical role in that election. In the election for governor between Jeb Bush and Buddy McKay, religious right voters voted overwhelmingly for Jeb Bush, the Republican. He owes his election to the 1/6 of Florida voters affiliated with the religious right, because non-religious right voters voted for the Democrat, Buddy McKay. We'll take a look at this. In the race for the Senate in Florida, that wasn't even close. In that race, Bob Graham, the Democrat, got reelected by 60 to 40 so far in the vote, but the religious right voted for the loser, Charlie Crist, the Republican candidate. 2/3 of the religious right voted for the Republican, even though he lost. So it looks like they have become the Republican Party's base. They vote for the Republican, even when no one else does. Judy?
All right, Bill Schneider, now to Washington and to our own John King, who's been thinking about it from his perspective. John?
Well, Judy, Christian right voters, religious conservatives certainly were the driving force of the Republican Revolution in 1994 and had promised an even more aggressive turnout effort this year. Some 35 million voter guides distributed this past Sunday by the Christian Coalition. So far, though, it's still early, but so far the results not encouraging for the religious conservative movement. As Bill Schneider mentioned, 2 governors closely identified with the movement, Fob James of Alabama, David Beasley of South Carolina going down tonight. Also, they had hoped in South Carolina the Christian right had to help Bob Inglis. Instead, incumbent Democrat Fritz Hollings winning. Also in some House races, closely contested House races, Christian right activists had said they hoped to prove the difference. They had targeted Julia Carson in Indianapolis, the 10th district in Indiana. She is winning, though, over Republican Gary Hoffmeister. Also in Kentucky's 6th district, the Christian right had hoped to help a troubled Republican candidate, Jay Williams, overcome conservative Democrat Ken Lucas. Mr. Lucas, the winner. So far tonight, not a good night for the Christian conservative movement. There are a lot of targeted races left. The North Carolina Senate race, conservative Republican Lauch Faircloth, a favorite of the conservative right. That a very tight race. We should look in the hours ahead to the state of Iowa. Christian right voters there promising to make the difference in the governor's race and in the case there. Judy?
All right.
Actually, it's Jeff. Judy, we're going to have to work on this. We have a call to make, and this is a big one. In North Carolina, CNN is projecting that first-term incumbent Republican Lauch Faircloth has been defeated, that John Edwards, the challenger, has beaten Faircloth. This was one of the more closely watched races all night. It is a pickup for the Democrats. And if John King is right that the religious conservatives aren't going to be happy so far, that would imply politically that the White House might be very happy. Wolf Blitzer, our senior White House analyst at the White House, I gather that the have you heard the champagne corks start popping, or is it still too early?
Still too early for that, Jeff, but they are happy. They're very happy about the Democratic wins in South Carolina and in Alabama. I'm sure they'll be very happy about what's happening in North Carolina as well. We just had a briefing here with Joe Lockhart, the White House press secretary. Says the president right now is in the chief of staff, John Podesta's office, going through the numbers, watching the internet with Craig Smith, who's the political director here. The first lady, by the way, she's a little superstitious. She's watching a movie in the family theater, the Oprah movie, Beloved, right now. She'll be staying there. The president has invited some cabinet members and others to join them in the family theater where there's a big TV screen. They're going to be watching a lot of the coverage shortly, soon as they move over from John Podesta's office. We can report that the president has already made one telephone call to a winner tonight, Evan Bayh, the Indiana, the governor of Indiana, who's now going to be the senator from Indiana. President Clinton calling him. He's also called Tom Daschle, the Senate Minority Leader, and Chuck Robb, the senator from Virginia. But he's going to go on the evening and watch all this very carefully. Okay. Jeff?
Thank you, Wolf. Coming up at 9 o'clock, a lot more polls closing, a lot more calls to make, including that Senate race in New York. But when we come back, it's the Capitol Gang.
Welcome to Capitol Gang. I'm Al Hunt with Bob Novak, Margaret Carlson, and Cato Byrne. Bob, we got a lot of elections left tonight, but the early returns are in, the early ones that have been called. Every one of the close ones have gone to the Democrats. Why?
Al, the Democrats are pleasantly surprised. Republicans are shocked. They never thought it was going to be like this. And what it appears is that the Republican vote was suppressed. It really didn't come out. Example is Indiana, one of the early voting states, where apparently they've lost the legislature. The Republicans have lost a couple of House seats they expected to pick up. And what we're finding all over the country, Al, is a phenomenally large African-American vote. They thought the vote was going to be small. The Clinton strategy worked. They got it out, and it is the margin of difference in state after state.
Margaret, do you think that might be because the Republicans' anti-Clinton, the Gingrich-led anti-Clinton ads boomerang? They instead of energizing the GOP base, it energized the African-Americans?
Right. The ads were only shown in 30 districts or so, but the free media that the ads got meant that they got nationwide attention. And that Gingrich decided to do it. And Gingrich in the impeachment robes is not a good picture to have. And although the election never became nationalized, this happening in the last week, it made A, Republicans look desperate, and B, it doesn't seem that it didn't work.
Kate, most of our results have been in the South, which has been the Republican base, the Republican stronghold. Boy, some big Democratic victories down there. Two said they kept Fritz Hollings in South Carolina. They apparently picked up a seat in North Carolina, and they won the governorships in South Carolina and in Alabama. Why the Democratic resurrection in the South?
About South Carolinians, we know that they like seniority in their senators. So now Fritz Hollings will stay to serve with Strom Thurmond.
He's been there for 36 years, and he's still the junior senator.
In every one of these races, Al, there are going to be individual explanations. Especially Senate races tend to be very idiosyncratic, and people are going to try to explain away. You know, Faircloth has been in trouble. That's that second North Carolina seat turns over all the time. Having said that, people are going to want to assign some responsibility because some of these races, although they were tight, the Republicans thought they'd get their share of them, and so far they haven't, although it's still early this evening. If it is a problem with the base, they've been beginning to worry about that, Republicans, over the last couple of weeks. The budget deal was very unpopular with their conservative base. If the conservative base is increasingly recognizing that Bill Clinton might slip the noose after all, I think that may have depressed that base.
I want to talk about that for a second, because I think if these results continue, if this election is basically a wash, I think the message it's going to send is, let's get rid of impeachment. I think Republicans are going to look for some way to get off this impeachment hook, Bob, if these are the results tonight.
There was on the phone today talking to Republicans before these results came in. There's enormous dissatisfaction with the congressional leadership on both sides of the aisle, the House and the Senate, from Republicans around the country. And if the two Bush brothers, not if, They have both won. Jeb for governor in Florida and George W. in Texas by big margins, not being liberals. They are not liberals by any means, but they're a different kind of conservative than this kind of abrasive conservative on the Hill. And you're going to find the Republicans who want to win elections saying, why can't you be more like the Bush brothers?
Well, or the governors are just more pragmatic and moderate. They have to get things done. They have to build coalitions. They can't be flamethrowers.
What do you think? Moderates, they're conservative, but they're not abrasive.
Pragmatic conservatives.
Well, Republicans weren't on Capitol Hill, though. Congressional Republicans were up against the White House incredible machine, and it is something to behold. The stonewalling, the demonizing the enemies, the way they're able to trash the Republican voices, that's something Republican governors and fairness don't face.
As opposed to the benign leadership of Newt Gingrich and all the other Republicans.
They're so sweet.
But Kate, let me ask you this. If what Bob just said is true, does Gingrich face potential opposition, or could he be toppled? Could there be another successful coup?
There'll be plenty of blame to go around, but I think more than its share will probably settle on Speaker Gingrich. You know, Newt, how come you let this happen to us?
He won't be removed, though.
He will not be removed.
No,
you agree with that, Kate?
not.
It's difficult to figure out who might replace Speaker Gingrich. Who would actually mount a
If you
challenge.
had a good candidate, I think you could beat him. What do you think, Mark?
You can't beat him with no one, and there's no one
The
emerging.
one person who might have beat him.
If I could do a little finger pointing, Bob, for a moment, Senator Mitch McConnell tomorrow should have to answer. The anti-campaign finance reform guy going around showering money here and not there.
Margaret, let me go back to the question we raised earlier about impeachment, and which my friend Mr. Novak uncharacteristically sort of ducked. If these results are a wash, is Bill Clinton off the hook?
Well, people say in the voting as they're going to vote, coming out of the exit polls, no, it didn't drive their vote. I think 20% say it did, and 20% say it didn't. The great middle says, you know, it had no effect at all. But we will all say that it did. Tomorrow, we will say that it did.
Let me make a
Bob's gonna
prediction.
recover now.
Yes.
Let me make a prediction that the impeachment proceedings will go forward. There will be new evidence coming out. The pre-election quiet by Judge Starr will end, but there's no question that the president's stock on the Hill, particularly with the Democrats, they had any idea of moving, has been strengthened immeasurably by the apparent early results of these elections.
Okay, we'll take that. Kate, we talked about the Bush boys a minute ago. They'll be the cover story for, I suspect, some magazines and some television shows, which gets us right into 2000. Do we know now? I mean, I hate to do it 2 years ahead of time.
Well, I'd like the West Coast polls to close before we have to talk about
But I mean, really, will the Bush boys be the Republican mantra for the future?
Oh, I think the media and we experts can't wait to start talking about 2000 and. Given George W. winning so big a second term in Texas, yeah, sure, there'll be all the George Bush front runners.
And are they like the Kennedys? Do they have to wait their turn? I mean, does Jeb have to wait till George W. has his shot?
Primogenitor. To go back for a moment to impeachment, if Republicans do decide that they're not going to pay any attention to what happened tonight, and they're going to go forward, it's going to affect 2000, because this whole idea that the one message people are trying to send is that we don't want you only to do scandals. We don't want just investigations, and you cannot win on that basis.
Let me just say one thing.
You actually have to do something.
I think basically when you looked at the issues, the way they were framed in this campaign, they really were redounded to the Democrats' advantage more than the Republicans.
Let me just say one thing about what apparently the results are showing. They're showing a lot of cleavages and fissures in the Republican Party. The pro-gun people didn't come out to vote because they had an anti-gun candidate for governor in Illinois. The pro-choice people didn't come out because they had a pro-life candidate for the Senate. A lot of the splits in the Republican Party as a big coalition party came out tonight.
Kate, I'm going to give you a final word.
I was just going to say, despite the Democratic spin, there's not much appetite on the part of Republicans for impeachment in any event, and if these results are disappointing, I think, barring a lot of new evidence or something startling, they're going to want to wrap things up.
A final word from Kate O'Byrne, and that's it for the Capitol Gang. Let's go to Larry King.
Thanks, guys. Coming up on a special edition of Larry King Live, a comprehensive look at today's midterm elections. We'll have analysis from the Washington Post's Bob Woodward, political strategist Mary Madeline and Bob Squire, former White House Press Secretary Dee Dee Myers, and Marlon Fitzwater. Plus live interviews with Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, California Senator Dianne Feinstein, and House Leader Dick Armey. They're all coming up next on Larry King Live. We'll go back to CNN election headquarters in Atlanta right after these words.
They say that politics is often an exercise in persuasion, but for Florida state candidate Gus Bilirakis, the trick is to persuade voters he is alive. You see, Democrat Diane Ellis says the real Gus Bilirakis is dead. She claims the Republican running against her is an imposter, hired by Bilirakis' father, a United States Congressman Michael Bilirakis. Now, Gus Bilirakis has issued a strong denial, noting that he has friends and neighbors who can vouch for him. Even the Democrats in this local race are troubled by their candidate. One of them put it in an understated way, "It doesn't give me much confidence in her candidacy." Coming up, when we come back, poll closings, a big headline out of New York, and Larry King Live. It just doesn't get any better than this.
It is 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. on the West Coast. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Bernard Shaw with Judy Woodruff and Jeff Greenfield. In New York, Bulletin, Senator Pothole has fallen into a manhole the size of Charles Schumer. Charles Schumer, a Democratic pickup tonight, ousting Alfonse D'Amato. What a biggie. In Wisconsin, the Mark Newman, Senator Feingold, Russ Feingold battle is still too close to call.
In the state of Minnesota, here's a close one. Skip Humphrey, Norm Coleman, Jesse the Body Ventura has thrown this one up in the air. We don't know where it's going to land. In the state of Colorado, still a close race between the Lieutenant Governor Gail Shetler, the Democrat, facing a challenge from Republican Bill Owens.
In Rhode Island, a three-way race too close to call between Governor Lincoln Almond, between Mirth York, and the independent candidate, Mr. Healy. That is not a disguise. In Wyoming, a close race between Republican Governor Geringer and his challenger, John Vinich, also too close to call.
We have a winner. Incumbent Republican Senator John McCain defeats Ed Ranger going back to Washington. This man might run for his party's nomination. Another winner. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the Democrat turned Republican, turns back Dottie Lamb's challenge in Colorado. In Louisiana, another incumbent. Democrat John Breaux, a leader of his party, beats Jim Donelon.
In the state of South Dakota, no surprise here, the Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle rolls back to Washington, defeating the Republican Ron Schmidt. In the North Dakota Senate race, another Democrat heading back to Washington, Byron Dorgan, defeats his challenger, Donna Nalawea. In Arizona, a win for the Republican incumbent, Governor Jane Hull, came into office 2 years ago. She'll hold on to that seat, defeats the Democrat Paul Johnson.
In Nebraska, this is a pickup. Republican Mike Johans beats Bill Hoppner to fill the seat of retiring Governor Christensen, a Republican pickup in Nebraska. In New Mexico, Governor Gary Johnson holds his seat. He beats Martin Chavez. The Republican is in for another term. And in New York, one of the least surprising results of the night, Governor George Pataki, Republican, who narrowly beat Mario Cuomo 4 years ago, cruising to victory over Peter Vallone, and there are those who think Mr. Pataki has national goals.
In Wisconsin, Republican incumbent Tommy Thompson keeps his job. This is not a surprise. Ed Garvey, the Democrat, used to represent the NFL Players Association. In South Dakota, another incumbent, Bill Janklow, beats Bernie Hunhoff.
There are some happy faces, we're assuming, at the headquarters of Charles Schumer, Congressman Schumer in New York, and our own Gary Tuchman is there. Gary, are they letting on that they're pleased yet?
Well, Judy, just now when you made the projection that Charles Schumer was the winner of this race, this place did erupt just a few minutes ago. Now they'll be waiting for the candidate to come down from his suite here in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel to give a victory speech, and the candidate's people say he will do that within an hour. Since the days of the Eisenhower administration, only Republicans have had this Senate seat, specifically 2 Republicans, Jacob Javits for 24 years, and then after that, a gentleman by the name of Alfonse D'Amato for 18 years. But that string is now going to end. Charles Schumer will get the seat for the Democrats for the first time since 1956. The main strategy of the Schumer campaign, to get out the New York City vote. 18 million people in New York State, 7 million people in New York City. That's 40% of the state population, and they apparently succeeded in getting out that urban vote. and apparently winning this election. Judy, back to you.
All right, Gary Tuchman, may be the biggest story of the night, Charles Schumer winning in New York. It also happens to be the most expensive Senate race in the country. They each spent $18 million, a total of around $32 million spent on that Senate race alone. Let's go to D'Amato headquarters now and to CNN's Gene Randall. Gene.
Judy, Al D'Amato has seemed vulnerable before, but it was very tough to bet against him. He had this uncanny ability to bail himself out of political trouble. But after 18 years in the U.S. Senate, D'Amato finally met a challenger who was well-financed from the Democratic Party, willing to match him negative ad for negative ad, attack for attack. Not even big-name help from New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, from former Democratic Mayor Ed Koch, and from Governor George Pataki, who was sweeping to re-election tonight, was enough. Right until the end, D'Amato seemed confident in public. He said on the eve of this election, he'd be serving at least 6 more years in the U.S. Senate. In fact, he'll be leaving in January. Judy?
All right, Gene Randall, I have to say he's one of the characters we're going to miss covering in the city of Washington. All right, Frank Sesno over there at the Balance of Power desk. Here are some more numbers to plug in.
Keeping count, Judy, and the count is very important. Remember, coming into this evening, the Republicans held the edge in the United States Senate, 55 to 45. Tonight, 16 of those Republicans, 18 of those Democrats are up for re-election, and they are fighting hard. 39 Republicans, 27 Democrats don't have anything to worry about tonight. So far, the Republicans have taken 9 seats, the Democrats 12. What this means, and this is important, the Republicans right now with 48 seats, the Democrats 39, 13 more to go. There is a net pickup right now of 2 seats for the Democrats. The Republicans said they were going to pick them up. They may, the night is still young, but right now the Democrats are up by 2. Judy?
Frank says no. Now, let's go to Larry King Live. He has lots of guests, and Larry, the shaking continues coast to coast with all these upsets tonight.
What a night, Bernie. Tremendous coverage, too. Thanks a lot. Welcome to a special election night edition of Larry King Live. Our guest for the hour in Washington, Bob Woodward, Assistant Managing Editor of the Washington Post. Democratic consultant Bob Squire, 3 clients tonight, and all of them winning. Former White House Press Secretary, now contributing editor at Vanity Fair, D.D. Myers. In Chicago, we're joined by Republican strategist Mary Madeline, and in Washington, former White House Secretary Marlin Fitzwater. In a little while, we'll be joined by Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, and House Majority Leader Dick Armey. Marlin, biggest surprise so far to you?
Well, the Schumer victory, certainly. I think all Republicans were hoping D'Amato would pull that out. But the closeness of all the races, I think, is surprising, and there's no doubt about it.
Bob, is this a plus? So can we only say Clinton's got to be happy at this minute?
At this minute, of course, the Lewinsky issue didn't carry any weight, and obviously that's a very, very big deal. And I think the reason is that people look at it as an issue of fairness, and by going on the air and saying, we want you to elect a Republican, it's kind of tampering with the jury or the grand jury, and I think people didn't like it.
Mary Madeline, what do you think?
I think the greatest joy of tonight, and my favorite story, of course, and if I can give a long-distance high five to Marlin, is the Bush boys' remarkable victories both, and the wave of this Republican Party. They both garnered non-traditional Republican voters, and if this party is to succeed into the millennium, they'll have to follow the models of those campaigns.
If the big story of the night is the Bush brothers, it's going to be a tough night for the Republicans, since that was the story 2 months ago.
The way in which they ran and won those campaigns, the voters that they garnered, non-traditional voters, and the way in which they united the party, which is very fractured and has resulted in some of these losses. But I'm not saying this is not a victorious night in general. I'm feeling very good about this election, and at the end of the night, the country will be moving inexorably, as it has for the last half-decade, to the Republican to center-right.
What is that, a spin, Bob, or what?
I always admire Mary. She was the last person standing in the Bush campaign, and I always thought that was wonderful. She was there when everybody else had abandoned President Bush. The message tonight is read my smile. If we could get Faircloth with D'Amato, that would be one huge
What does it look like now? You represented the opponent of Faircloth. What does it look like?
No, we did not. We did the state party campaign, which did the commercials against Faircloth. I think the exit polling of issues looks very good, and I would hope that soon we might be hearing a call down
What changed, Dee Dee? What happened tonight? 3 weeks ago, this was going to be a romp.
Right, and well, 3 weeks ago it was going to be sort of a push where the Republicans would pick up some seats. It wouldn't be overwhelming one way or another. And I think what happened was Republicans turned this from being a series of elections about local issues into a national referendum on impeachment. And the country doesn't seem to be, at this point, it's still early, but the country doesn't seem to be interested in impeaching the president. And it's a referendum on fairness. I don't think that most Americans think this process has been fair to the president, and they're standing up and being counted.
Marlon, you would have thought, hold on, Mary, one second. Marlon, you would have think it would have been duck soup. You've got a president with an intern. You got a national election in an off year when the off party always makes gains. Where did you go wrong?
Well, I think they just couldn't leave it alone. And trying the ads, even though the ads only went in 22 districts, it was still too cute by half. And it hid all the bad things the Democrats were doing. All their mean-spirited ads were buried under this story about the Republican advertising.
And they did a lot of mean-spirit on the other side. Mary, Madeline, do you think that maybe your best friends were your enemies?
God, Larry, look, I
What happened?
any of these guys to find any of these races that was a referendum for or against Clinton. All of these races fell on very traditional lines. That is turnout, 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 turnout. And they were won or lost on local races, on local issues. The two governors we lost in the South so far, it appears we've lost in Alabama and South Carolina. That was on the lottery issue and on somewhat not well-run
I got to get a break, Mary. So what would have happened is that if the Republicans were running ahead, you would have said also that had nothing to do with the president.
I've been saying that consistently since before
I want to get that
Monica.
clear. I think they just declared Edwards.
In 1994, this election, the off-year election, was nationalized by the Republicans very effectively with the contract. The fact is, trying to nationalize this election as a personality attack on the president was as sorry a failure as that was a success in
You agree, Bob?
Well, it wasn't a personality attack. It was about the Lewinsky issue. And
but why shouldn't have that gotten them a ton of votes?
Well, it did. Dee Dee's right. Look, it is basically a fairness question,
Right.
and people look and also. Though the issue seems to be irrelevant now, or it didn't work, tomorrow morning the impeachment investigation of Bill Clinton is going to be a big issue still, because the Republicans are still going to be there.
The voters are saying tonight what they've been saying in poll after poll after poll, which is we don't want any more of this stuff.
Right.
What we want is this president to be allowed to be the president of the
Time
United
to get a
States.
break, guys. We'll come right back with our panel. Dianne Feinstein will be aboard. Lots to come on this special edition of Larry King Live, and CNN coverage throughout the night. Don't go away.
CNN's coverage.
Welcome back to Larry King Live. We'll be back with our panel in a couple of minutes, but joining us for those minutes from CNN San Francisco Bureau is Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California. Of course, the polls are still open out there. Are you surprised thus far at what we know?
I'm surprised so far, yes, because I think none of the Republican predictions of 60 votes in the Senate are going to come to fruition. Of course, as you said, Larry, the polls are open in the West. There's some close races. I'd like to urge everybody that's just come home from work to go out and vote. But so far in the rest of the United States, there have been 3 Democratic pickups and no losses of the must-wins for our side. So I think that's very good news.
Do you agree with our panel that apparently the president was not the referendum here tonight?
Well, I can tell you this. I've done more than 24 events for people in California in the last couple of weeks. And I only had one question from one woman at one event. That was it. About the president.
Yeah.
And I think what is very important and not to be missed is that the issues are with the Democrats. And the 2 big issues that are strongly with the Democrats are, one, education, and the other, health care in terms of the Patient's Bill of Rights and HMO reform.
Education,
and I think that's pretty clear.
Education is what will elect Gray Davis tonight, right, if he wins?
I think that's absolutely correct.
Now, what's the turnout, since that's going to be significant in the Boxer-Fong race?
Right.
You understand, you people still online, but what is the turnout in L.A. and in San Francisco where Boxer needs turnout? What's the turnout in Orange County?
Well, the turnout is running pretty much as of 4 o'clock
as it was in '94. But there are a record number of absentee votes, according to the Secretary of State, well over 2 million. And they're going to be slow to be counted. So this
You mean we're
isn't
not going to have a
be over
result?
till it's over. That's why people should go and vote.
You know, you're saying that in the senatorial race, we will not have a winner tonight.
Oh, I think, you know, the exit polls have shown that Senator Boxer is winning this race. But I'd urge caution, and I urge people to vote, because there are more than 2 million absentees, and absentees generally run conservative, although this year may be different.
And what, couple of other things. What does this say to you about morality, an issue that certainly you questioned? You didn't want to talk to the president for a time. You would only talk to him about issues other than
angry.
what happened. Does this say that the public just, that's important but not that important?
No, I don't think it says anything. I think what it says is that people were interested in the issues of the race, and they were interested in the individual candidates that were running. And I think that's come through clearly in case after case. I think people have had this whole impeachment thing kind of up to here. Now, that's not to say that it's going to go away tomorrow, but I think people look at the Congress as forging real solutions to real problems.
Thank you, Senator. I got to take a break, but I thank you very much for joining us again. She reports that the exit polls show Barbara Boxer doing well. We'll go to Atlanta now, and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Thank you, Larry. We have two races we want to call at this hour. In Georgia, in the governor's race, here's a surprise. The Democrat, Roy Barnes, keeps the seat for the Democrats, defeating the Republican Guy Milner, who poured millions of dollars into this race. A hard-fought contest, a big win for the Democrats. In the state of Rhode Island, the incumbent Republican Lincoln Almond holds on to that seat, defeating Mirth York. This is actually a rematch. Mirth York tried to win 4 years ago. She lost. She tried again, and she's lost 2 times. So Lincoln Almond will stay in the State House. Those are the results as we have them at this hour. CNN will continue to bring you results and to call the races as soon as we can. Now back to Larry King.
Thank you very much, Judith, and we'll be back with our outstanding panel and more conversation. We'll be joined by Dick Armey in a little while. This is Larry King Live. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're in Washington with more analysis of tonight's election returns. Our guests are here in Washington: Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, Democratic consultant Bob Squire, former White House press secretary Dee Dee Myers, in Chicago, Republican strategist Mary Matalin, and in Washington, former White House press secretary Marlin Fitzwater. In a little while, we'll be talking with Dick Armey. Mary, if the president was not a national issue, should he have been?
No, the people have made their minds up, long ago in 1992, that this was a flawed man, and they dismissed that for other things that they found attractive about him, and they've never had any expectations for him morally, and he's consistently risen to those low expectations.
So you're not surprised at the occurrences tonight?
No, Larry, and I've been saying it before Monica, after Monica. This is certainly, Monica is not the first of the president's scandals, that people were not going to cast a vote on something that they're just sick of. They just dismiss it. The one thing that this particular scandal did do is suck the oxygen out of the political air, which was just as bad for Republicans as Democrats.
Now, Bob, I'm sorry, Mary, but I want to get everybody in with tough times. The concept of the or she just pointed out you wanted to say something. The concept of the Republicans. Do you think it's everybody taking a bath now? Politics is down?
No. I mean, Bob Squire was saying, read his smile. If you talk to people in the White House, they will say their big worry now is that Bill Clinton is going to try to declare the Day of Atonement and sackcloth and ashes over and go out and smile himself. And I think a lot of political advisors are saying, and I think Squire would agree, he should not.
He should not. And I think in '94, we made as big a mistake as the Republicans made an advantage in the contract. We went out and basically helped them nationalize that election in '94 by putting the president on the road. The president was not on the road this year. The president was being the president. He sent the vice president out to do the political work. And I think this president has learned a lot in the last several years. I doubt he is going to be doing anything else but the nation's business.
Give us an analysis, Marlon, to this point, and we understand that a lot of races are still open, as to what, if this continues, where you see it strategically went wrong.
Well, I think whatever the margin is, tomorrow the Republicans are still going to have control of the House and Senate. They're still going to be in power. They're still going to be running the impeachment hearings. I think they're lacking from, there was no kind of overall message from the party, and of course that's very hard to accomplish anyway in a congressional election, because
they had one in '94.
They had one in '94 with the contract. So there was no kind of agenda to follow. Secondly, there was no kind of single leader. I mean, Newt has got his own problems, and there really isn't anybody else to step up. And so that's a problem, especially with President Clinton working so hard for the party on the other side. And so I think that was a difficult issue, even though I think it's also clear that the mandate was not President Clinton's okay, let him off the hook, but simply keep it out of this election, go deal with it.
But if you'd have predicted this back in January, Dee, when the Lewinsky story broke,
right,
no one would buy this.
Absolutely, and certainly on August 17th, when the president appeared before the nation, nobody would have bought it.
That night you sat right here.
I sat right here on this set, and you know, it was a terrible night.
But all the polls have been showing that people are writing this thing off. I mean, this is not surprising. I mean, all the polls have been showing.
So Mary's right. People are writing off this whole impeachment.
There is something going on, though. You know, I think a lot of people felt that this was a squirrely sort of election cycle. It was hard to tell what was happening out in the electorate. In the last few days, there seems to have been a sort of an energizing of the public. And so far, and it's very early, but so far, every close race has broken Democratic. If that trend continues, I think we're going to have to look at it and say there is some trend here. There is some broader message.
And the minorities can claim this victory, can't they? I mean, they've turned them out.
They indeed have, and that is the Clinton-Gore power center.
There's also something else going on in the two parties right now, and the bigger thing that's happening here tonight is that it's very possible that we may be seeing a really big shift in these two parties. If the Republicans don't get their act together and be able to fold the right wing back into the center of the Republican Party, or what's left of centrists in the Republican Party, as well as Bill Clinton and others of the New Democrats have led our party to come together, you know, this is going to be a very different
Did Clinton take the center? Did he take the center away from the Republicans?
What we did as Democrats was, after years and years of creating the middle class out of poor people, from the days of FDR forward, we actually turned around and said, these middle class people should be our voters, not the Republicans' voters, and we began to deal with them.
So what do the Republicans do now?
I think they moved to the next generation of leadership. The new governor of Texas, the new governor of
Mary's people.
Tell us why the Bush brothers are so appealing. Why is George W. Bush, now the governor of Texas, this magical figure, the front runner? I remember going to interview him 10 years ago, and he, quite frankly, seemed a little bit like a nervous kid.
What is his name? I think they're appealing for two reasons. One is they both have a strong feeling for what they believe in, and they have an agenda of education and reaching out to Hispanics and others. They have good personalities, and politically, they come from the right. They don't have to improve themselves to the right wing, and yet they know how to also relate to moderates, to Democrats, crossover voters, in a way that Ronald Reagan did in 1980.
They ran centrist kind of campaigns, too.
And they're the first Republicans who really, I think, among the first Republicans who aggressively reach out to minority voters.
We'll get a break, and we'll get a break, come back with our panel. We'll be back with Dick Armey, lots more to come. And don't forget, continuous coverage right here on the only place to be, CNN. Don't go away. CNN been with you all day and into the night, covering the off-year election of 1998. Welcome back to Larry King Live. And now with us, panel will be back shortly, a man who's tirelessly campaigned for GOP House candidates this year. He was everywhere, running unopposed himself. The House Majority Leader, Dick Armey, joins us from Dallas. Mary Madeline says it's a big night for the Bushes. Do you have any other comments on the Republican showing to this minute?
Well, first of all, you can't look at it to this minute. It's a long night, There are going to be races where there'll still be counting in the morning. When it's all over, we're going to have more Republicans in the House, more Republicans in the Senate. We're going to come back to work right away. We're going to start with cutting taxes for the American people. It's time that these folks got a tax cut to get this economy back on its legs. We'll be working for a stronger defense. We'll be fixing Social Security and retirement security. We've got a lot of work we'll be doing next year.
Do you expect to have an increase in the House and Senate?
Oh, of course, yes. There's no doubt about it.
No doubt about it.
One of the things we have to understand is even in some of these races now where they're being checked off, you have to understand that they're not done counting those races. We got a lot of counting to do before this night's over.
Would you say at this point you're disappointed based on just what we know to this point?
No, well, the problem is we don't know very much at this point. Quite frankly, at this point, no, it's too early to be disappointed. There's a great many races out there. There's going to be a lot of surprises. I've seen this before just 2 years ago. Remember, they were burying us early in the evening, and we came back fine. And remember this, Larry, it's been 70 years since the Republicans won back-to-back-to-back majorities in the House of Representatives. And, you know, we're going to have a larger majority. It doesn't take very much of an increase for us to be able to really get this thing on track and go back to work and get these things done, like cutting taxes and fixing retirement security, improving our nation's defense, which is a very high priority with the American people, and all this other work that we've got to do. We've got so many... And let me just say this for the benefit of Senator Feinstein. The best ideas that have the greatest appeal to the American people on education are the Republican ideas of local control
why aren't you
and
sleeping
local authority.
Tonight? Why is it even close?
Well, we knew all these races were going to be close.
Why?
You know, we got all of these theories about what this year is. One of the things we have to understand, above everything else, this is an incumbent year. Because the American people are happy with what the Congress has been doing, and it's going to be an incumbent's year. So we will have close races in an incumbent year.
Was it a mistake?
When you have close races, you should wait until all the counting's done.
Was it a mistake, do you think, personally, at the end, to hit Clinton on the scandal thing in those 22 cities with that ad that got played everywhere?
Well, you have to remember that that ad was highly targeted, but the other part of this is one of the things that we've seen very clearly, the American people are very concerned about moral decline in this country, issues of ethics, standard, and conduct. And the fact of the matter is we all must accept that if we want the high privilege and great responsibility of being in public office, we've got to be held accountable for our conduct. When you do not tell the truth to the American people, when you mislead your own White House staff, when you commit perjury, these are serious things before the American people.
And all of it is true, but so far you've lost Senate seats. It has not been, the people may be angry, but they don't appear that angry. Would you agree to that?
Let me just say, so far, let me just give you a quick little insight, Larry. When Democrats win, they win in inner cities where the boxes are counted most quickly. And obviously that's important to you. But when you get all of these boxes counted, I went through this in my own race in 1984. I went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, 600 votes down by the current count, knowing I'd won, because I knew what boxes hadn't been counted. And it's your outlying, more rural boxes are the latest ones coming in, and that's where we beat the Democrats. So you're saying it's too early for people to start declaring knockouts around this place.
And you're saying hold off on all these projections in the close races. Thanks, Dick.
And you all wait. Tomorrow morning you're going to be looking forward to a far more prosperous nation with more well-educated children and happier parents feeling like schools are more accountable.
We're going to hold this tape, Dick.
All right.
Dick Armey. When we come back, our panel with more comments. We'll see what they think about what Mr. Armey said. Maybe are we counting too quickly, too soon, projecting too fast? Don't go away. We're back on Larry King Live and our coverage of midterm election results. Our guests in Washington, Bob Woodward, Assistant Managing Editor of the Washington Post, prominent Democratic consultant Bob Squire, former White House Press Secretary, now contributing editor at Vanity Fair, Dee Myers. In Chicago, the Republican strategist Mary Madeline, and in Washington, former White House Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater. Mary, did Mr. Armey have some points there about jumping too soon at these results?
Well, not only is it too early and the outlying areas do come in later, but none of the absentee ballot votes have been counted. All of these races are very, very close, and they're not, it's not going to, he's right, it's not over till it's over. But I will say, all the things he was trying to say about Republican policies, it's so important that he did get that out, and it could not have gotten out, did not get out during the election cycle, because as I started to say, the president sucked all the oxygen out of the political air. It's not that people voted for or against Republican policies. They don't know what they are. You couldn't get any message out there on issues.
Does she have a point?
Well, no, I don't think surprisingly, I love Mary, but I don't agree with her on this. I think that there was certainly a great deal of the political year where that was true, where the scandal in Washington, fueled in many ways by the Republicans as well as the president, did suck a lot of the oxygen out of the air and drew a lot of the attention. But in recent weeks, the Republicans were still predicting pretty big pickups, and I think the elections did refocus on kind of local issues. Local campaigns were talking about local issues. And I think that began to change in the last few days. I mean, I think we've seen something happen in the last few days that we weren't expecting. All the close races are breaking one way. Let me make one other point. The Republicans were not only predicting big victories, but they were outspending Democrats by more than $100 million between the individual campaigns and the various committees. When you add independent expenditures on top of that, Democrats were vastly outspent.
What got the Democrats out tonight, the voters?
Well, I think, again, this whole issue of a kind of backlash involving the investigation of Clinton. I mean, Squire over there, when someone was saying that the public is headed up to here with the Lewinsky scandal, Squire was raising his hand up here, and there's a certain truth in that. But I have to go back to the point.
Let me interrupt you a second. Newt Gingrich is going to say some words at his headquarters in Marietta, Georgia. He had little opposition.
Well,
Here's the Speaker of the House.
We asked you all to put out yard signs, and you did. We asked you to make sure all your friends and neighbors voted, and based on the results, you did. This is the earliest night ever in my life that we have been able to claim victory. And I think all of us up here want to thank you. We've been through some very long evenings over the years, and it's so much more fun to be able to claim victory this early and have a whole evening to party. Although they've arranged a few TV interviews for me, so the rest of you get to party a lot more than I do. But it's exciting. Let me also say that it's exciting to see Paul Coverdale doing as well as he's doing and returning to the U.S. Senate. As all of you know, Paul is a great senator, and he's already entered the Senate leadership as a freshman, so I know he's going to go back with even stronger support and an even stronger commitment to fight for freedom. Let me also say, I've looked at some early returns, and I understand the news media's propensity to rush out and declare that Roy Barnes has won, but I just want to offer a caution. I remember at 7 o'clock in the morning in 1980, as Senator Mattingly came from behind to win when the last Cobb precincts returned. I remember when Senator Coverdale was supposedly out of the race early in the evening, and Weichfowler was declared reelected, something that became a boo-boo, is the technical term in the trade. There are an awful lot of big precincts, an awful lot of folks who voted absentee. I also remember Connie Mack, my dear friend from Florida, who had to get elected 4 days after the election as the absentees finally finished getting counted. So I would just say on that one, let's hold our powder. Guy Milner's run a great race, has offered the kind of leadership that would reduce the size of government and cut taxes, and I want to see how that election comes out the rest of this evening. But as you look around the country, there are a couple of things that you're probably not going to hear very much in the national media. So let me just emphasize it. This will be the first time in 70 years that Republicans kept control of the House for a third term. You know, and you would think that to do something for the first time in 70 years would be a fairly big deal, but not among the Washington pundits. Well, why is it a fairly big deal? Well, because you have every committee will be chaired by Republicans. Every subcommittee will be chaired by Republicans. The Rules Committee will be 9-4 in favor of Republicans. And we will schedule legislation based on a Republican agenda. Now, we will gain seats this evening as the evening goes on, and let me just say to you, we're gaining them from a base that people tend to forget. Since Bill Clinton became president, we have gained 51 House seats, 12 Senate seats, 14 governorships, and over 500 state legislators. And on every one of those categories...
We're back. That was Newt Gingrich, a winner tonight easily, with little opposition. But extolling the virtues of his party, claiming this is a victory tonight. Now, some things out of whack. Why are you smiling and he's smiling, Squire?
Because what they did was they put him out early. They knew that he was going to have a bad night. He does not want to be out there at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock tonight. So they shoved him out early. He makes the speech, and then he disappears. I think, by the way, the next Speaker of the Republican Party will be the first Republican of the leadership that does not go on TV tonight.
Mary, what do you make of what Newt just said?
I make what he said at the top. Why don't you think it's a big deal that that something has happened for the first time in 70 years?
Because in off-year elections, the average pickup is 37 to 42.
That's wrong, Larry. That's wrong. There's been 4 elections where the pickups have been over 40, and all the rest, the average is 12 to 14.
So you didn't expect to do well tonight, then?
I have been saying, and Republicans inside the committees have been saying all year long, 8 to 10.
But the Speaker's been saying 20 to 25,
and you know what?
50 at one point.
The minority leader had been saying at the beginning of the year that the Democrats are going to take over the House. So do you want to match up our maximum leaders for their spin throughout the year? The technicians and the operatives have been saying throughout 8 to 10 seats, and that's what it's going to end up.
Isn't this politically true, Bob, that on a night like this, everyone has a reason to be happy, and or if they don't, they invent one?
Well, Squire's happier than everyone. I think that's. But I was smiling at what Gingrich was saying, not for Squire's reasons, but Gingrich is still going to be Speaker. The Republicans are going to still control the House.
But they knew that.
Well,
they knew that this morning.
There was a high expectation of that, but that is the political reality, and you have to look at where is the center of gravity politically in the House of Representatives, and it's right there.
But the Republican Party tomorrow morning is going to be weaker. The Democratic Party is going to be stronger, and that's the reality.
But not in control.
Marlon, politically, any effect on the impeachment committee?
I don't think so. I think it goes ahead pretty much as planned without change.
Let's go to Atlanta and Judy Woodward. Jude.
All right, Larry. Well, we have a call to make. In the Georgia governor's race, CNN declares that the winner will be the incumbent, the man who holds it now, Republican Paul Coverdell. This one was close a little bit earlier, but now we are saying he will win, hold on, against the former head of the Great American Cookie Company, Michael Coles. So a good night for the Republicans when it comes to that particular Senate seat in the state of Georgia. Larry?
Thanks, Judy. Stay with CNN throughout the night. We'll be back with more of Larry King Live and our great panel right after this. Welcome back to Larry King Live. We'll get some comments from our panel in just a moment. But joining us now from Capitol Hill, the Senate Majority Leader, always good to see him, is Trent Lott.
Larry, good to be with you.
Good to be with you. So far, Senator, Mary Madeline says it's a big night for the Bushes, and Dick Armey says we're counting the votes too soon, projecting it too soon. What's your read so far, right to this minute?
Well, I think we've got a long way to go, of course. Yes, the Bushes have done well, both in Florida and Texas. Those are big states, important states. And we think we are still in good position, obviously, in Ohio with Governor Voinovich for the Senate. Illinois still looks good. Kentucky, we feel like we've got a good shot there. Nevada, out west, and of course it'll be quite some time before we get the returns from Nevada. But we still believe that we're going to pick up a net gain in the Senate for Republicans.
In what area are you disappointed?
Well, anytime you lose an incumbent, you're disappointed, and I'm sure that's true with Democrats, too, and they lose some Democrat incumbents, so you hate to see that. Al D'Amato's been a great senator for New York. He's a good friend. And if, in fact, he lost, and by the way, I'm not ready to concede that one. I suspect that there's still a lot more votes going to be counted there, too. But you know, the important thing is for us to get this election behind us and focus on our issues for next year. And we're going to start off very fast with increased majorities in the House, the Senate, with the governors, and in the state legislatures. You know, we're a majority party all across the board in America.
In the last 2 weeks, you did emphasize, I know in one speech I saw you make, character. Why apparently isn't that working tonight, that the president not being an issue?
Well, you know, I went all across the country, Larry, and the presidential issue really was not a big issue as you went into different congressional districts and Senate races. People focus on local issues. They focus on local control of education or local tax issues, bond issues in some instances, stadium votes when you're in San Diego. They look at the personalities of the individual candidates for the House or the Senate and governor. And, you know, the old saying, all politics is local. And I think that was really true this year. And I think this was sort of a status quo election. People confirmed basically what we've been doing. The American people feel by 3-1 they're better off now than they were 4 years ago when we took over with majority in the Congress for the Republicans. And so overall, incumbents did pretty well. We don't know what the final results are going to be, but it looks like we might have had 4 or 5 incumbents in the 2 parties in the Senate that might have been defeated. That's pretty overwhelming re-election return.
Do you think we'll be up all night with this?
I think there are some races that probably will go well into the early evening and in the morning, actually.
And are you confident about Kentucky? That's 50-50 now.
You know, I'm not confident that we've got it won, but we have an excellent shot there. The polling all night has been showing it basically even, with Jim Bunning, the congressman, up a little bit. Same is true in Nevada with Congressman Jim Ensign being a little ahead there. It looks
and what do you hear in Illinois?
Illinois, we hear that Fitzgerald will be the winner.
Thanks very much. It's always good seeing you.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay, what do you make of that? Are we jumping the gun?
Absolutely.
We are.
Absolutely. A lot of races to go. And as I said, we're still going to have a majority. Good, strong party to build on. Know where the weaknesses are, where we can build a strength.
Well, I'll go back to Woodward again. Why does Squire look happier than you?
Because he's got 3 clients. He made $1 million tonight.
Mary, are you going to be up all night with this, do you think? What's your read there in Illinois?
This is an exciting election night. It is one of those old-fashioned ones where we will be up all night and probably for many days counting those absentee ballots. Don't count your chickens, Larry.
I'm not counting any chickens. I'm just trying to observe. Do you have a read on Illinois and the Braun race?
The newscasts here are all raving about the unprecedentedly high black turnout in the city, and it might make a difference in the races, but probably not. Just make it closer than everyone thought.
What's the biggest surprise to you, Dee Dee, right to the second?
Right
59:53 Eastern Time.
To the second is that every single race, close races, have all broken one way. Except for Coverdale. Well, Coverdale wasn't supposed to be a close race a week ago, but all the close races seem to be breaking one way. I think everyone's right. The results aren't over. We have a long night ahead of us, but I think as results go, it's going very well for Democrats right now.
Bob?
D'Amato Faircloth. That's a huge story.
Both losses, you mean?
Yeah. If we'd have said 8 weeks ago that they'd both go down, we'd have been called crazy.
Would have been the Clinton top 2 hit targets? If you had asked Bill Clinton this morning, what 2 senators would you like to see defeated?
I've lasted this business 30 years by not speaking for presidents, Larry. No.
Well, would you guess?
She used to do it for a profession.
Would you guess?
I would guess that. That's a pretty good guess. I would say there's not many that would top above those 2 on the list.
See how well she does that?
Why D'Amato? Now, he headed the Whitewater investigation. But in fact, they beat D'Amato. The Clintons did. That was not a good investigation. Now, why should they sit up there?
It was a very partisan investigation. And
Sure, but they won.
And he's a very partisan member of Congress, and they won, but it's nice to win again. No one's against that.
Yeah, but does the level of personal vindictiveness go to the point where you say, do you hear somebody investigated me? We essentially beat him, but we really hope he loses and cheer if he does?
Well, I think, look at it also, Chuck Schumer has been a good friend to the president. He's been a good, solid ally of his, a reliable vote, and I think the president's very happy that Chuck Schumer won. I have not talked to the president about this,
You're sounding like
so
the White House
don't,
press secretary.
Well, because I haven't talked, no, if I had been the press secretary, I might have talked to the president about this, but I haven't, so I don't want to go down that road.
He's also wrong on a lot of issues, like choice, for instance.
Yeah.
Do we
This is a
expect
big victory for choice.
statement? If you're the press secretary sometime tonight, does he come out and speak to us, or does he wait till tomorrow?
I think he'll wait till tomorrow.
Everyone agree with that? President waits till tomorrow?
Oh, I hope so.
Because you don't want to jump the gun, right?
Exactly.
We could call him right now.
He doesn't want to call.
He's got a cell phone. Call him, Squire. You got the number. Call him.
He's always had a gloat problem. He's got to wait till tomorrow.
We got to ask Squire about Gore, though. Does Gore come out a victor in this election?
Oh, I think he's a
Why?
big-time victor. Because he spent, the last, 4 months campaigning around this country, raising money for these candidates, raising his own PAC money to give to these candidates, and campaigning with, all of these people that are doing well tonight.
But and the overall White House strategy has been successful, which was the president went and raised a lot of money, and even though Democrats were vastly outspent, did a good job, and Mrs. Clinton and Vice President Gore did the campaigning, and so far so good.
We thank you all very much. Mary Madeline in Chicago, Marlon Fitzwater, Dee Dee Myers, Bob Squire, and the venerable Bob Woodward here in Washington. We will take a break, come back with some other comments, and then send you back to Atlanta for continuous coverage throughout the night. I'm Larry King in Washington. Don't go away. Tomorrow night on Larry King Live, Senator Joseph Biden squares off against Bill Bennett. We'll look at everything that happened tonight. Right now, much more of CNN's comprehensive live coverage. The polls are about to close in 5 more states, so there's a lot more to be decided. Right now, we're going to go back to CNN Center with Bernard Shaw, Judy Woodruff, and Jeff Greenfield. I'm Larry King in Washington. Thanks for being with us, and stay with CNN throughout the night. Here's Bernie, Judy, and Jeff. Guys.
It is 10 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 p.m. on the West Coast, and from CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Bernard Shaw, along with Judy Woodruff and Jeff Greenfield. We have a bulletin headline. For the first time since 1934, the Democrats in an off-year election are likely to pick up seats in the House of Representatives. However, and this is very important, it does not appear at this hour that the Democrats will get enough to take over control of the House. We have some calls to make. In Idaho, Governor Dirk Kempthorne is the winner for the Republicans. This was an open seat. He turns back Bob Huntley's challenge. In the Senate, again, an open seat. Mike Crapo for the Republicans, the winner over Bill Mock.
In the state of Iowa, Charles Grassley holds on to his Senate seat, defeating the Democratic challenger David Osterberg. In Utah, another Republican incumbent heads back to Washington, Bob Bennett defeating Scott Leckman, the Democrat. And in Nevada, this is one we knew was going to be close, and sure enough, Senator Harry Reid battling the Republican challenger, Congressman John Ensign. We're watching that one.
In the Nevada governor's race, a too close to call race between Las Vegas Mayor Jones and Mr. Gwynn. The Iowa governor's race, too close to call. Democrats have not held this seat since 1962. That was the last time they were elected. But Mr. Lightfoot and Mr. Vilsack are in a very tight race.
Now, just in case you're joining us, this is what you missed so far in our live coverage tonight of this Election 98, this very important and surprisingly surprising developments tonight in this surprising election year race. Here is a summary of the major calls we have made tonight. In New York, look at this. Democrat Charles Schumer has upset Alfonse D'Amato. North Carolina, another upset. Wealthy attorney John Edwards turning back Lauch Faircloth and turning him out of government.
Who knows how to do it?
Ernest Hollings, the senator from South Carolina, hangs on, and here's his victory statement.
let me thank everybody here. I tell you.
Fritz Hollings has held this seat since
Some of my colleagues.
Well, he's been
since 1966. He was elected to fill out a term. He's been a senator for 32 years and a junior senator every single day because of Strom Thurmond.
If we had had a race in the early part of last year, I couldn't have gotten any of y'all here. I can tell you that right now. Because I'd have lost everything, but we organized. And we got, look at it, this wonderful ticket. We got Dick Harpootling. There, our chairman. Yes, sir. They say I'm arrogant, so I can mimic Benjamin Franklin coming out of Constitutional Hall said, "We've given you a republic if you can keep it. We've given old Dick a party if he can keep it." That's the best thing. We got a Democratic governor. Isn't that the greatest
Hollings
thing
is accepting his victory. He almost lost 6 years ago. He is one of the more vulnerable senators this time. This has to be a disappointment. And even more disappointing to the Republicans is the news that Bernie announced a few minutes ago that, absolutely contrary to every prediction but a few, for the first time since 1934, the party in power, Democrat or Republican, is going to increase seats in the House of Representatives. This is why politics is fascinating. You know, you can always be surprised. More calls. We've already told you in South Carolina about Fritz Hollings. And in South Carolina, Jim Hodges, the Democrat, has defeated Republican Governor David Beasley. Gambling a big issue there.
In the state of Alabama, a big pickup for the Democrats. Don Siegelmen defeats the incumbent governor, Fob James. In the Peach State, another pickup a hold for the Democrats, but Roy Barnes defeats Republican Guy Milner in his third try for statewide office.
As you know, we've got a major political story unfolding tonight, and the exit polls tell a big story behind this story. Bill Schneider, you've been looking. What is driving this vote?
Well, Bernie, it's absolutely fascinating because there are several reasons to think why the Democrats are doing well. Reason number one, is it a backlash in favor of President Clinton over the Monica Lewinsky scandal? Well, when we asked people, was Clinton a factor in the way you voted, this is across the country today, in the national vote for the House of Representatives, we found no. 59% said Clinton was not a factor in their vote, and in point of fact, the number of people who said they cast their ballot to oppose President Clinton was slightly more than those who said they cast the ballot to support President Clinton. Now, state by state, this varies, of course. In some states, there seems to have been a backlash. In other states, no. But overall, there doesn't appear to have materialized a big backlash in favor of the White House over the scandal. Well, if it wasn't a backlash vote, what was it? And the answer is, it was the economy, stupid. We talked earlier about the fact that 85% of Americans have a positive view of this economy. Those Americans who said the U.S. economy is excellent, 3/4 of them voted for the Democrat, even though President Clinton wasn't on the ballot and most of the incumbents are Republicans and Congress is controlled by the Republicans. Americans who said things are going in the right direction in this country voted heavily Republican. And here's a big surprise. In North Carolina, voters who said they were financially better off did not vote for the incumbent, Lauch Faircloth, the Republican. They voted for his challenger, Edwards, the Democrat. In New York, voters who said their family finances were better didn't vote for the incumbent, Al D'Amato. They voted for his Democratic challenger, Chuck Schumer. So the economy appears to have paid off big time for the Democrats. And finally, another factor important for the Democratic victory was the role of African Americans, heavily targeted by the Democratic Party. Today, nationwide, African Americans voted 8-1 Democratic. In fact, that's about 7 points more Democratic than they had voted for the House in 1994. We're finding in our exit poll that African American voters were absolutely crucial to many of those upset victories across the South. African Americans re-elected Senator Hollings in South Carolina with over 92% support. Whites voted for Engler, the Republican. African Americans elected a new Democratic governor, Siegelmen, in Alabama. Whites voted for the incumbent, Fob James. In North Carolina, African Americans, 90% voted for Edwards. Whites voted for the Republican, Senator Faircloth. In Georgia, the first Republican governor, a Democratic governor was continued in office in Georgia. Barnes, he was elected by African Americans, and Hodges in South Carolina was elected governor, again, by African-American voters. White voters voted for the Republican. Jeff?
Here's one fact that you and us and all of our colleagues are going to be chewing over. Remember, in 1994, not a single Republican in the House or Senate or governor, for that matter, was defeated. Based on what we know so far, and I caution this could change, we know of exactly one House incumbent Democrat who is likely to lose, and that's a remarkable finding so far. To put more gloss on this, we are going back to our wise, I would not say men, people. Mike McCurry, former White House Communications Director. Tony Blankley, former spokesperson for House Speaker Gingrich. Tony? Yeah. Let me interrupt 1 second. We are calling in Ohio. We are calling that Bob Taft is going to be elected the new governor of Ohio, replacing George Voinovich, who goes to the Senate. He defeats Lee Fisher, a great-grandson of a president, grandson of a senator, son of a senator, now a senator. Now, Tony Blankley, it's later than it was before. You see that smile on McCurry's face growing even wider?
Yeah, just a slight bit.
What happened here?
First of all, I'm curious, which of the two of us didn't qualify to be one of the two wise men, but as opposed to people?
You'll have to look at the exit polls, Tony, but analyze this for us. You heard your former boss try to put a gloss on it. Is that going to be very convincing tomorrow?
If current trends continue, no. Now, I don't think Newt's in any trouble as far as the speakership's concerned, but look, this is the 19th biennial federal election I've been involved with in some way, usually in politics now, commenting on it. And it's been my experience that win, lose, or draw, you can actually learn things from an election if you're a politician. And the question is, will the Republicans and perhaps the Democrats learn valuable lessons for the next election cycle? Or are they going to try to delude themselves and persuade themselves that they didn't do anything wrong and it was just fate? And I think there are going to be lessons to be learned. Part of it is mechanics. I think the labor unions did a very good ground game. They got the vote out very well. They played this sort of as a national primary, driving their voters out. They did a very good job on that, as opposed to '96 when they did advertising that I don't think worked as successfully.
Mike McCurry, 4 years ago, the Democrats could not possibly put a spin on losing both houses of Congress. Now, this time, is there any way, if in fact the Democrats gain a couple of seats in the House, that the Republicans can say, well, we're still in power, so it's okay?
Well, of course they will, and that's the presentation you heard from the Speaker tonight, although I suspect there's going to be some recriminations directed in his direction. Why did we end up with this kind of result? But listen, message is important in these elections. That was true 4 years ago. With the contract for America, which the Republicans put forward. Tonight, I think Democrats are doing well precisely because they stress issues like Social Security, like health care, like education. In fact, I predict that you'll see the president as early as tomorrow bringing people around to begin talking about long-term changes in entitlement, setting up a bipartisan approach.
Excuse me, Tony and Mike, I need you to stand by for a minute. We have a guest that we are going to right now. He is the former Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle. Mr. Vice President, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. If the Democrats, in fact, are going to pick up a seat or two in the House, is there any way this is good news for the Republicans?
Well, no, that's not good news, and I hope it doesn't happen. When you come west, I think you're going to find that Senate seats are going to go more Republican, House seats will go more Republican, and when this is all over and you analyze this tomorrow, it's going to be a net wash. Incumbents are going to do very well, by and large. 95% or more will get reelected. The majority will still be with the Republicans in the House and the Senate, and we'll have overwhelming majorities in the Republican governorships around the country, and that's good news for Republicans.
Mr. Vice President, do you think that there's anything different that the Republicans could have done this year to help them hang on, in particular, to some of these seats in the South?
Absolutely. Two things in particular. One, in that budget agreement where you put tactics ahead of ideology, that was a big mistake. When I say tactics, it seems that the Republicans were only interested in making sure that the government didn't shut down rather than the principles of tax cuts, of banning partial birth abortion, education savings accounts, missile defense. And secondly, the Republicans win when we stick to the issues. And I'll have to say the Democrats did get their issues out. They demagogued it, but they got their issues out there. And the Republicans need to focus on the issues, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing these next 2 years, talking about our issues.
Well, whom do you put the responsibility on, Mr. Vice President, for the Republicans not sticking with ideology, as you put it?
Well, there's 535 members of the Congress. We have the majorities, but there are a lot of Senate Republicans, Republican congressmen and women who are running, they each run their own campaign. Clearly we need leadership. We need leadership that's going to rally the Republican Party, that's going to unify the Republican Party, that's going to get back on message, and that is tax cuts, especially for the middle class. That is to give parents these education savings accounts. It's a Republican initiative.
So are you suggesting a change in leadership in the House is what's needed?
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the leadership at the national level. The one good thing tonight is that we are now one election away from clearly Bill and Hillary Clinton leaving the White House, and I hope Al Gore and Tipper Gore go too.
Jeb Bush, the new governor of Florida, is being greeted by his supporters, being hugged by them, by his dad there, former President George Bush. Jeb Bush, the younger brother of George W., the Texas governor, is now stepping up to thank this audience. Mr. Vice President,
thank you so much.
This should be music to your ears. As we listen to Jeb Bush for a moment, we'll come right back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. About 5 minutes ago, I received a call from Lieutenant Governor McKay, who congratulated us on our victory. I commended Lieutenant Governor McKay for his years of service to this state. He has served this state with distinction. He is deserving of our applause and our support. I want to thank first Almighty God for giving me the opportunity to serve. I want to thank the best parents in the world by far.
Jeb Bush, a very happy Bush tonight as he has won that battle with Lieutenant Governor Buddy McKay in Florida, the next governor. Vice President Dan Quayle, in all likelihood, if you go for your party's presidential nomination, Jeb's brother, George W. Bush, who won by a landslide tonight in Texas, no surprise there, will be heavy competition for you. What do you do?
Oh, I think the Bush boys did very well tonight. Jeb capturing that seat in Florida, that's a pickup for Republicans, and George W. winning by an overwhelming margin. I was sitting here applauding when I was listening to Jeb's speech, and I'm just thrilled for both of them. They're good people. Jeb will be a great governor. George Bush has been a good governor.
He's going to be hot competition for you. He's an issues man, as are you. How do you fine-tune your candidacy?
I guarantee you that's exactly what the Republican Party needs, is to have an issue-oriented debate, because that's when we prevail, when we get the issues out there and not worry about tactics and process and procedure issues like the tax cuts and banning partial birth abortion and education savings accounts and missile defense. I mean, these are core gut issues that the American people overwhelmingly support, and we just need to take it to the people, let them make the decision, and the decision will be much more Republican.
Mr. Vice President, one of the things that Governor George W. Bush Jr. accomplished tonight that Republicans have in the past had trouble with is he cut deeply into the Democratic base of African American and Hispanic voters. Do you think this is going to be a matter that will influence Republicans in 2000, the ability to reach beyond the base? And if that's true, what credentials do you bring to that as opposed to, say, a Governor Bush?
No, you do have to reach beyond what you and the media refer to as the base. The Republican Party is a party of principle. We're a party of ideas. We are an open party. We say, come on in, join our party if you agree with us on the issues. The Republican Party is very value-oriented, and I find many people are much more attracted to the Republican Party because we are the ones that are talking about responsibility, stronger families, commitment, respect, faith. You heard Jeb Bush say, faith in God. That's who he thanked tonight. That's what the Republican Party is all about, and we are an open party. And we do have to do a better job in recruiting minorities, Hispanics, blacks, and others into our party. I'll be the first to admit that. Now, in my own case, I did very well running for re-election to the Senate in Indiana. When I was running my campaign by myself, I did very well in opening up the doors to all.
Yeah. Mr. Vice President, if I could interrupt you, in North Carolina, we have Republican Senator Lauch Faircloth making his concession speech. Let's listen.
Marion Barry left town before I did. Now, Senator Helms, all of those things that I listed that we did, and as you well know, there were many, many more tax cuts and everything. But bear in mind now that my replacement said he was going to vote with you. So, hold him to it. You know, after all of the times that in this campaign, and I look out across this room at face after face of people that I have worked with, grown to respect, and to love. People that have come forth and all over the state made their homes available, beautiful homes, receptions, and you all have attended. I feel that I let you down because we should have won. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And evidently emotional Republican Senator Lauch Faircloth of North Carolina, as you could hear there, saying that I feel I let you down because we should have won, a concession speech. We want to bring you a result right now from the nation's capital, the District of Columbia. We declare a winner in the mayor's race there. His name is Anthony Williams. He's a Democrat. He defeated the Republican Carol Schwartz. Anthony Williams, new to the city. He came to the city 3 years ago to be the chief financial officer. He replaces longtime Mayor Marion Barry, who held that post, if you add up the 2 times he was mayor, for 16 years. Mr. Vice President, we haven't forgotten about you. It's just that the news keeps rolling in. Just one last question. Do the Republicans need to think about perhaps a new approach, a new strategy when it comes to the South?
No, absolutely not. Jeb Bush, who just declared the new governor of Florida, Paul Coverdale, first Republican since Reconstruction that got reelected to the United States Senate from the state of Georgia. We've done very well in the South. The Democrats picked up a couple of seats. I was very disappointed in South Carolina in particular. But we'll analyze those races, see what went wrong. But the Republicans just need to stick to the issues, talk about the future, what you're going to do for the American people. It's not how much money of the taxpayers that you're going to spend that counts. What really counts is how much you care about the American people, and that's where Republicans win.
All right. Former Vice President Dan Quayle, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And when we come back, the House Democratic leader Richard Gephardt will be with us. We'll be right back. We're going to go in just a moment to the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, Dick Gephardt. But before we do, we want to show you some of the races too close to call. Look at those numbers in the state of Kentucky with 91% of the precincts reporting. Jim Bunning, the Republican, just a hair ahead of Democrat Scotty Basler, 50-50. In the land of Lincoln, Illinois, look at this. Carol Mausley-Brown holding on, a little under the 30% of the precincts reporting. She is behind, but doing better than some had expected. Peter Fitzgerald is ahead. In the state of Wisconsin, Russ Feingold doing better than some had expected. 20% of the precincts reporting 261 to 209. And in Nevada, still too early to call. This one's close, very, very early. We're not going to attempt to call it because the numbers are so small at this point. Bernie.
Richard Gephardt of Missouri is the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives. Just a short while ago, CNN reported that quite possibly for the first time in 64 years in an off-year election, the Democrats could have pickups in the House but not necessarily take control of the House. What's your read on that, and what does your counting tell you tonight?
Well, Bernie, it's still too early to tell, but indeed, if we break even or even pick up a seat, it would be a historic reversal of what usually happens. I'm told the average loss in a 6-year of a presidency election, an off-year election, is usually 27, some say even higher than that, 30, 35 seats loss. So if we break even, lose a few seats, or certainly pick up a seat or two, this would be a historic reversal. And I think it really says something. It says the people stood up and said, hey, we want you to listen to us. We want you to take up our issues, health care, education, Social Security. I think that's what people were saying tonight.
Okay, Mr. Gephardt, let us interrupt you. CNN is making a call now, going to the heartland now in the Midwest, Iowa. The Democrats pick up the seat. The winner is Tom Vilsack over Republican Jim Ross Lightfoot. This is the first time in 30 years that a Democrat has done this.
It's another, I think, reason that you have to say people stood up and said something tonight. I want to remind you, too, that Republican candidates probably spent $110 million more than our candidates spent tonight. I know in that race in Iowa, I think Mr. Vilsack was outspent substantially by Jim Ross Lightfoot. The people really spoke tonight. I'm very proud of people going to the polls and voting for the issues that are important in their lives. Health care, education, Social Security, that's what people were voting on tonight.
Congressman Gephardt, it's Jeff Greenfield here in Atlanta.
Hi, Jeff.
How you doing? Assuming that you come out of tonight still the minority leader, that the Republicans still have organizational control of both houses, let me bring up the 800-pound elephant in the room that we haven't yet talked about. Is there any way to do bipartisan work in the Congress as long as impeachment is on the table?
Well, we've got to try to do that. The American people don't send us to the Congress to be partisan. They send us there to try to solve their problems. And I will reach out every day in every way that I can to the Republicans and try to fashion bipartisan solutions to our problems, whether it's education, our health care, our Social Security, or the economic issues, taxes. We will reach out and try to get things done. That's what people want us to do. They don't want us to be ideological and partisan. They want us to work together and solve the problems that they face.
Mr. Gephardt, I need to interrupt one more time because news keeps rolling in. This is a call we are making in the state of Massachusetts. This is a Republican hold. Governor Paul Cellucci, the acting governor since Bill Weld left, has defeated his Democratic opponent, Scott Harshbarger. That Massachusetts State House remains in Republican hands. So, Mr. Gephardt, here's another question you're going to be hearing, I suspect, a little bit. Now that you are not going to be the Speaker, if our projections are right, how does this affect, if at all, your decision as to whether or not to seek the presidency in the year 2000?
That's a decision I haven't approached and won't for some time. I'm just happy tonight that people spoke out on these issues, and I'm excited to go back to the Congress and work on health care, Patients' Bill of Rights, to work on more classrooms and more teachers, and to bring about a sensible solution to the Social Security problem, saving the surplus for Social Security. Those are the things people want us to work on, and that's what I hope to be able to do.
All right. Thank you, Congressman Gephardt. We haven't checked the hotel registrations for Iowa and New Hampshire just yet. Thank you very much for being with us. We will be back in just a moment.
We have a governor's race, so we want to report to you a governor's result in the state of Wyoming. The Republican Jim Geringer holds on in that state, defeating his Democratic challenger, John Vinnick. This was a race, Mr. Geringer was seeking his second term. In the state of Minnesota, still too close to call, the governor's race here. Jesse the Body Ventura has surged into the lead. This is a big story. Skip Humphrey, son of the late Senator Hubert Humphrey, second, and very narrowly behind him, Norm Coleman, the Republican. Jean Meserve, you're our woman on the governors tonight. What in the world is going on in Minnesota?
Well, I'm sure that Skip Humphrey is asking himself the very same question. He had been favored in many polls to win this race, but as you just mentioned, Jesse the Body Ventura, former pro wrestler, actor, Navy SEAL, suburban mayor, is right now in the lead. We should mention, of course, that's only with 18% of the vote in. Those numbers will, of course, change somewhat as the evening goes on. He appears to be appealing largely to male voters, to younger voters, to voters with less education. Jeff?
Had enough surprises. We have a former wrestler leader in Minnesota. Democrats may actually pick up a seat or two in the House. They may become even in the Senate. For all we know, in the next half hour, an alien spacecraft will land in Washington. We'll be back in a minute.
It is 10:35 on the East Coast, 7:35 on the West. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Judy Woodruff, along with my colleagues Bernard Shaw and Jeff Greenfield. Boy, do we have some surprises tonight in this midterm election, all the way from the Deep South to the state of Iowa and moving west. Let's go now to our balance of power man, Frank Sesno. Frank, help put some of this in perspective.
We'll do that, Judy. You know, when we go back to Washington, it's going to be a very different place. Let's start with the United States Senate. You know, that's the place they'd have to vote to convict and remove the president from office. Well, things may be just a little bit different when we go back. Coming into this evening, the Republicans held 55 seats, the Democrats 45. Here's the way it stacks up right now. 52 for the Republicans, 39 for the Democrats, 9 still undecided. Some very, very close and competitive races among those 9, some of the very closest. We may not know them until late in the evening, but that's the way it looks right now. So far, pretty good for the Democrats. Their highlight, clearly, so far, the great state of New York, where Chuck Schumer beats Alfonse D'Amato after D'Amato's 3 distinctive terms, Bruce Morton.
Well, there are a couple of secrets to that, Frank. One is the old Democratic friend, the gender gap. Schumer lost among men 49 to 51. He carried women 59 to 41. That's a 10-point gender gap, which is pretty solid. And the other explanation, I think, is the Jewish vote. 6 years ago, 1992, D'Amato got 39% of the Jewish vote. Today, he got 24%, whether that's because Schumer is Jewish, whether that's because of the president's success with the Mideast peace negotiations, whatever. Those two numbers spell why he won. In North Carolina, the old-fashioned formula, John Edwards, 40% of the white vote, 90% of the black vote. And we talked before about the two-sided nature of the state, old agriculture, new high-tech. Edwards won amongst newcomers, people who've come to the state in the last 15 years.
Now, back to D'Amato for just a moment, Bruce. It was interesting because during the Middle East peace talks and after, that's one area where the White House said this might help in the state of New York. And they made the point there, and they sent Hillary Rodham Clinton several times up there.
Well, she's been a weapon. I mean, you know, Carol Mausley-Brown is still in this thing, apparently, and I think Hillary Clinton's the reason for that. She came to the state twice. She's been a fundraiser, an attention getter. She's been just a wonderful campaigner for them.
Okay, that's the Senate, the snapshot for now. Now over to the House of Representatives. We'll remind you that coming into this evening, of course, the Republicans held a margin over in the House of Representatives. 11 seats for the Democrats. They would have taken control. Apparently, they're not going to get that, but they will make some inroads. As it stands right now, the Republicans have 152 seats under their belts. The Democrats 138, 144 critical races remain undecided. But Stu Rothenberg, you and I have been looking at the numbers and the names and the exit polls throughout the evening, and we're seeing some movement. Why don't you start with your list?
Frank, a lot of amazing races here. In Florida, Democrat Corinne Brown, challenged by Republican Bill Randall, former president of the Jacksonville AFL-CIO. She has held on. Republicans said that their candidate could get some black votes and add that to white votes. That did not happen. In North Carolina, Mel Watt, member of the House Judiciary Committee, ended up being reelected in a redrawn district that included many more white voters. In Pennsylvania, Republicans won in the Lehigh Valley, including Allentown and Bethlehem. Pat Toomey, Republican, won an open seat. Was Paul McHale's. He had called for the president's resignation. And in Scranton, Republican Joe McDade has retired, and Democrat Pat Casey, who is actually trailing in the polls, appears to be leading with about 2/3 of the vote in. And also, finally, in suburban Philadelphia, Montgomery County, John Fox, Republican congressman, trails Joe Huffle, his opponent.
Very interesting. Now, one of the other races we're looking at is out in Kansas. Vince Snowbarger, one of the most conservative members of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Frank, 94% of the vote in, and Snowbarger is trailing by 4 points against Dennis Moore. This is a surprise. Democrats had hoped Dennis Moore would come around here. He raised a lot of money. It looks like it's turning for them.
Okay, anything else? Any other
Lots
major
of other
flags
races
to raise up there?
Sure. In Ohio, Ted Strickland, the Democrat, has held on a top Republican target. In Ohio's 1st Congressional District, Steve Chabot, a Republican, looks like he is ahead. Massachusetts, John Tierney, thought to have a tough race, has held on. And in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Marjorie McKithen is actually leading Richard Baker very narrowly. This would be a big upset.
Now, we are getting results in. We want to tell you, at the outset of the evening, we told you we had lists that we'd gotten from both parties of their most endangered candidates. So far, on our list, the most endangered Republican candidate, one of them, those seats has gone to the Democrats. On the Democratic side, they've kept one, they've lost two. So far, not so bad for the Democrats, much more to watch. Back to the National Desk.
Frank, and when we come back, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who won re-election tonight here in Georgia, Newt Gingrich. That and more.
Joining us on this night of surprises, one of the Republican winners tonight. He is none other than the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich. You can see now, here's what his raw vote looks like, with 33% of the precincts counted in his district, the 6th district in the state of Georgia. He's ahead, more than 2-1, ahead of his Democratic challenger. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
Tell us, how do you explain what is happening? You had predicted at one point Republicans would pick up 10 to 40 seats. It's now looking as if the Republicans may not pick up at all.
Well, I think we frankly have to stop and look at all the returns once they're in and try to go district by district to see exactly what happened everywhere. I think from our standpoint, this will be the first time in 70 years that we kept control for 3 elections in a row. I think that's the good news. I think there are races we thought we'd win that we're clearly not winning, and I think there are places the Democrats that they win that they're not going to win. But I think the big lesson of the evening may well be the Republican governors who have proven once again that if you are a tax-cutting Republican who reforms government in order to cut taxes, you can get reelected by 65 or 70% of the vote. And I hope that will lead all of us to understand that we ought to go back in January, save the Social Security system with the surplus, and then have a pretty large tax cut, and that's really what the Republican Party stands for, is lowering taxes to have more take-home pay and more economic growth.
Mr. Speaker, what is there a sense then from these results, if they remain as they are, that the Republicans overreached in their investigating and targeting the president?
No, Judy, first of all, the news media was vastly more fixated on the president and the investigation than the Congress was. We talked about saving Social Security. We talked about cutting taxes. I didn't give a single speech in the last 2 months where we talked about anything except basic issues that matter to Americans, winning the war on drugs, reforming education. But you couldn't penetrate the news media, which has this, as you are once again tonight, this fixation on that question. The fact is, everywhere the Republican governors could get the message out, we did very, very well. And the Republican Party has a very bright future. But House and Senate Republicans need to work together from day one next year to both save Social Security and cut taxes. And I think, frankly, that'll set up a year 2000 where we'll win the presidency and have a remarkable couple of years in 2001 and 2.
Mr. Speaker, it's Jeff Greenfield. We are now estimating the Democrats will pick up 3 seats, and obviously that can change. But just a few moments ago on CNN, former Vice President Quayle, in fact, suggested that the problem was that the Republicans did not focus on their core issues. And you've heard the complaints by some of your party members as the Congress left Washington that, in fact, there had been a kind of an accommodation in an attempt to get back to the country. Do you think come January that your leadership will come under fire from conservative Republicans who believe that you kind of sacrificed the message and didn't even get the benefit of the election?
Jeff, first of all, you covered Washington. You know that the House Republicans passed an $80 billion tax cut. The House Republicans passed a budget which called for a $100 billion tax cut. And the House Republicans fought consistently for cutting taxes and saving Social Security in 1998. The fact is that we are deeply committed on those issues. I didn't see Vice President Quayle's interview, so I can't comment, but I would agree with him that Republicans do better when we focus on reforming government, cutting taxes, returning money to the American people, and if you add to that, saving Social Security with personal Social Security savings accounts, I think we have a very powerful winning package. I fully expect that if you also look at the record, and Jeff, again, not a single person in this interview was alive the last time the Republicans won control of the House for 3 consecutive terms. So maybe somebody would like us to be in a minority. That would be an alternative. But we are the only successful Republican team at staying in control for 3 terms, literally in your lifetime.
This Bernie Shaw. Just a moment ago, you accused the news media of being, quote, fixated on scandal. If the news media were so fixated, why did your party spend millions of dollars in the 11th hour of this campaign on ads which you were aware of?
Bernie, if you would like to take the total number of minutes on the total number of talk shows on your network and the other 3 networks and add up how many of those went to discussing Social Security this year and how many of those went to discussing all the various aspects of the scandal, I think you spent vastly more money in terms of airtime than any political party in America on that topic. We tried to talk all year about issues that we think matter, starting with saving Social Security.
But my point was, why did you spend the money on the ads talking about the scandal?
In the first place, the environment the media created said there was only one issue that mattered. Now, here we are again tonight. I'm talking about saving Social Security, cutting taxes, strengthening national defense, winning the war on drugs, and you want to talk about the scandals. I'll let the viewers decide which of us is fixated and which of us is trying to solve problems.
Well, I was trying to ask you to comment on why you spent the money on the ads. But Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich, thanks for joining us.
Bernie, any of your folks who covered me will tell you, in every single speech, I focused again and again on precisely the issues I just outlined.
Thanks for joining us on our
Thank you.
coverage. Quite welcome. We'll be back with more on this election night 98 in just a moment.
We just heard from the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. As we mentioned at the outset of this coverage, he and President Clinton, while they were not on a national ballot this year, had their fates very much in the hands, or their fate was in the hands, I should say, of the American electorate. Let's go to Bill Schneider to find out what those who voted today thought about House Speaker Gingrich. Bill?
Well, Jeff, we asked them, and we indeed asked people, do you have a favorable or an unfavorable impression of Speaker Gingrich? And I'm afraid the results are not too good for the Speaker. Overall, most Americans, almost 60%, said they were unfavorably disposed toward the Speaker of the House, Speaker Gingrich. Democrats, of course, are unfavorably inclined, 83%. But here's the bad news. That figure is even higher than 58%. It's 60% among independents, and 2/3 of moderates have an unfavorable impression of the Speaker. His leadership may be in jeopardy as a result of today's events. There is a division among Republicans over the Speaker. We find that only 18% of conservative Republicans have an unfavorable opinion of the Speaker, but 42% of self-described moderate Republicans don't like Speaker Gingrich. This is a split in the Republican Party that's going to become more serious because now the Republicans have suffered an electoral setback. One additional point. We are now estimating turnout in this election to be 38% of the voting age population. 38% doesn't sound terribly impressive, but actually 38% of the voting age population is a little higher than it was 4 years ago in 1994, and if it does turn out in the end to be 38% of Americans of voting age turning out to vote today, that would be the highest level of turnout in a midterm election since 1970. We've been saying all along that higher turnout would benefit Democrats, and that appears to be exactly what happened. Judy?
All right, Bill Schneider. Well, we have a call to make in the race that we've been saying was the closest one all night long in the state of Kentucky. The man who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, Republican Jim Bunning, defeats the Democrat Scotty Basler, 2 congressmen who fought it out tooth and nail, day and night for months and months. And the winner, CNN declares at this hour, Jim Bunning. So that is a story because it's a pickup for the Republicans. We have been talking earlier tonight with 2 of our analysts, and we want to bring them back right now. Mike McCurry, the former White House press secretary, and Tony Blankley, former communications director, press secretary for the Speaker, Newt Gingrich. Gentlemen, since we talked to you last, the numbers in the House have been rolling in, and as I know you've heard, CNN is now projecting the Democrats may pick up as many as 3 seats in the House. Tony Blankley, what does that say about the kind of campaign the Republicans have run?
Well, not a lot. I mean, the fact is that they were not expecting that. They were expecting, at the worst, to pick up in the middle digits. The turnout was higher than they expected by about 4%. And there's going to be a lot of disappointment and a lot of grumbling. I don't think it's going to amount to any challenge to the Speaker, but obviously this is something that they didn't expect, and I think they have to come to grips with. You know, I couldn't help thinking also, as we were watching this, and Mike was just mentioning, watching Quayle being interviewed while Jeb Bush was talking, we had the sense that we were seeing the beginning of the presidential campaign. And I think that's really the zone that we're going to be moving into now. This election is not even finished being tabulated, and already the moves are being made, the issues are being looked at and articulated tonight on CNN for the presidential campaign.
Mike McCurry, is there, if I may, is there a danger here for the White House now? Is there, I mean, people have made the point sometimes that the president's at his best when he's in trouble, and sometimes when things are going well is when he gets in trouble. Is there a danger of Democrats overreaching, or is this just a victory they should enjoy and capitalize on?
Well, enjoy it they will, but I don't think, given what they have been through and given the distance that they have traveled thinking where they were going to be or what some predicted they would be, I don't think they are going to take anything for granted. I mentioned earlier, and I agree with Tony, hearing former Vice President Quayle and Speaker Gingrich both try to wrestle with the issues of why didn't we talk more substantively to voters, and hear them both sort of list the issues that they wanted to bring before the American people. They were radically different. The former Vice President Quayle was appealing to a more narrow band of activists in the Republican Party that were going to have impact in 2000. The Speaker was sort of wrestling to try to get back on firm bipartisan ground that I think is the story for their party tonight. They've had their success and their moments to be proud tonight when governors who are pragmatists, who are centrists, who work in the center of the political spectrum have won victories. Now that's the message that I know they're going to hear at the White House. You know, now Tony, I know that tomorrow they're going to go right to what the Speaker said at the White House and try to build bipartisan approaches on Social Security. You'll see that happen almost immediately.
Perhaps. I thought watching Jeb Bush's election this season, and that is sort of like the template for the model Republican message in the future. Because what he did was he got into the education issue positively, he addressed himself to Hispanics and blacks, but he never compromised on his issues. He was still right to life and guns. He held all his positions, but found a way to talk about them.
Tony and Mike, let me interrupt you this, Bernie. We're going to make a call in the land of Lincoln, Illinois. CNN estimates that when it's all said and done, Carol Mausley-Brown has gone down to defeat. Wealthy state legislator Peter Fitzgerald picks up for the Republican Party the Illinois seat once occupied by the first African-American woman in the United States Senate. CNN's live coverage on this election 98 will continue in a moment. Back with more analyses and more reports on races that are still out.
Is name recognition really always a plus? Well, in Georgia's 5th Congressional District, the Democratic incumbent and civil rights hero John Lewis is being challenged by Republican and retired horse carriage operator John Lewis, John H. Lewis Sr., that is, no relation. Democrats say that Lewis Sr. was recruited by Republicans to confuse the voters. But after 5 failed campaigns for political office, he would have to confuse a lot of people to come anywhere close to winning this one, and in fact, he didn't. In just a minute, California, here we come.
At this hour, it's 11 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States. On the West Coast, it is 8 p.m. from CNN headquarters here in Atlanta. This is Election 98. I'm Bernard Shaw, Judy Woodruff, Jeff Greenfield. We are making calls on the California races. Going to the boards now. CNN is declaring that when all is said and done, Barbara Boxer will have saved her seat in the United States Senate as a Democrat from California. CNN calls in Washington State incumbent Patty Murray turning back a challenge by Linda Smith.
In the California governor's race, Gray Davis, this is a pickup for the Democrats, a big win. The biggest state in the country wins over Dan Lundgren. The Hawaii governor's race, too close to call. The incumbent Governor Cayetano against Linda Lingle, the mayor of Maui. In Oregon, Ron Wyden will be returning to the United States Senate, the Democrat, defeating Republican John Lim. And also in Oregon, another incumbent holds on. Governor John Kitzhaber will stay in the State House, defeating Republican Bill Sizemore.
California has been one of the most watched states in the whole country. Close Senate race and a governor's race that's considered the biggest prize of all. We go now to Los Angeles and to Candy Crowley at Boxer headquarters. Candy, I take it they're more than pleased.
Hi, Jeff. Actually, the excitement's picked up here a little, and just for the sake of accuracy, I'm actually in San Francisco at Barbara Boxer's headquarters here at the Fairmont. In any case, this is a big win for her. It may not be the year of the woman, but it's certainly the year for this woman. They really sweated this race up until about October 1st. Aides say that they believe that Boxer was hampered by the fact that she was still back in Washington. She was running against a man named Matt Fong, the Republican, a little-known state treasurer from out here. He was able to pretty much take over the race while she was gone. They feel that Fong got away with a lot. They say he just ran as a nice man. When Boxer came back, and in the last month, they have just plummeted his negatives, rather raised them up. And they have said that what they've done here on the airways, remember this is the couch potato state, the rally is around a TV set watching all of these ads. Boxer outspent him 2-1, drove his negatives up, and the polls literally turned around within the last month. They didn't think that they would win by as big as they may win tonight. Basically, they also believe that Fong was not yet ready for a primetime player. This is a man you may see again, but his campaign really was not able to take on the onslaught from Boxer, did not reply until too late in the game, they believe. They think they're going to get a pretty good victory out of this, and more importantly, a very big victory for the Democratic Party in California to have their first governor that's a Democrat in 16 years. 2 Democrats from the Senate, 2 women, Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer. Very, very big place, California. Lots of electoral votes, something that any Democratic candidate running for president, say in the year 2000, could use as a base. Jeff?
Thank you, Candy. I apologize. No San Franciscan wants to be confused with Los Angeles, but that was a Senate seat Republicans had lots of hopes for. The biggest prize of all the governorships, California, has gone to the Democrats for the first time in 16 years. Let's go out somewhere in California to Jennifer Arthur. Jennifer in Los Angeles.
Jeff, we are here at the Biltmore Hotel where Lieutenant Governor Gray Davis, perhaps Governor-elect Gray Davis is better put, is not due down here to this room to celebrate for another 2 hours. But apparently Gray Davis was able to reach out to women, reach out to minorities, and it is very clear he was able to reach out to moderates in this state. And the big question was whether or not the moderate and the independent voters were going to come out and show their support. Gray Davis was needing to appeal to the middle. He had to show Dan Lundgren, his Republican opponent, to be right of the electorate. He was able to do that. He is passionate about education. He is pro-choice in a pro-choice state. He also said that he would not raise taxes and that he would continue to support the death penalty. These are some of the centrist themes that Gray Davis had to use to appeal to moderate voters. He was apparently able to do that. Another thing that Mr. Gray Davis had to overcome was his image. Some people said that he was too dull to ever capture the governorship. He called Vice President Al Gore his personal charisma coach. He even said, "Boring is beautiful." Back to you, Judy, in Atlanta.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer Arthur. Well, before we talk about balances of powers, let's look in on George W. Bush in Texas. This is a happy man, just reelected to a second term.
Tonight's resounding victory says my compassionate conservative philosophy is making Texas a better place. But today's election says something more. It says that a leader who is compassionate and conservative can erase the gender gap, can open the doors to the Republican Party to new faces and new voices. It says someone
from a happy re-elected Republican to a happy newly elected Democrat, Charles Schumer in New York. This was a big one, a hard-fought race, a very expensive race. There he is singing, swaying, shaking hands, his family around him. Charles Schumer in New York, Pat Moynihan. These are the two senators next January from the state of New York. All right, now and before we go back to Texas, we want to say that we want to make a call in the state of Illinois. CNN projects that the winner will be George Ryan, the Republican. He will defeat, we project, Glenn Poshard, the Democrat. That's one that's been holding out for some time tonight, and now we call it for the Republicans. And now back to Governor Bush.
I will continue to promote policies that will help usher in a new era for Texas, one based upon personal responsibility. I will continue to work to change our culture from one that has said if it feels good, do it, and blame somebody else if you have a problem, to a new culture where every Texan understands that each of us must be responsible for our actions, for our families, and each of us must be responsible for loving our neighbors like we'd like to be loved ourselves.
All right, we're listening to somebody who has had a good night, not such a surprise, but good nevertheless. Let's turn to our own Bill Schneider to talk about some of the exit polls in the state of Texas. He has to be looking at these numbers tomorrow, if not tonight. Bill?
Very good numbers indeed for George Bush, and this could point a new direction for the Republican Party. He won handily, and he carried both men and women. Let's take a look at the support for George Bush in his governor's race. A few good pieces of news for Republicans. He carried men, but he carried almost two-thirds of the women's vote. Among Hispanics in Texas, he carried almost half of those. That's very important because Republicans have been worrying about how many Hispanics have been going for the Democrats. 21% of black voters, very, very important. Now, we asked the voters in Texas, do you think George Bush would make a good president? Two-thirds of them said yes. So they think he'd be a good president, but do they want to give him up and send him to Washington? The answer is no, or at least they're not sure. They're divided over that. Do they want him to run for president? 48 said yes, or serve out his term. 46% said he should do that. So the voters of Texas like him, but they want to keep him. Judy?
All right, Bill, and we want to head right back to New York. And Charles Schumer, let's listen.
You have honored me with your trust. And I promise all New Yorkers that as hard as I fought to win this election, I'll fight even harder for everyone in this state and for the country that we all love. During this campaign, I've traveled throughout this state
make a point about
again and again. I have learned the hopes and the concerns of families from one end of this diverse and beautiful state to the other, from Buffalo to Brooklyn, from Syracuse to Setauket, from Mineola to Manhattan. The desires and dreams and needs of the people of this state are the same. And I want to be a senator who will work to bring unity to our state and bring our state together.
We should report, given the intensity of this race, that just before we took air, Senator-elect Schumer said that Senator D'Amato had called him to congratulate them. There were some who wondered whether that would even happen, given the tone of this race. It is also, given New York's reputation as a Democratic state, this is the first time literally in decades, that the state has had two Democratic senators. And we will be back in a moment.
Watching our coverage tonight, along with you, Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, who is a very powerful Democrat in his own right and certainly in the senior chamber back in Washington. Looks like you're going to have unexpected company.
Yeah, it's a good night, I think. I mean, Chuck Schumer's victory, John Edwards' victory, Evan Bayh, Blanche Lincoln. I mean, these are all very, very qualified people, and we're enthusiastic about them. And, by the way, we never count these things over until all the votes are cast, so we'll count them all up and see how we do, but we're pleased with our success tonight.
How do you think this is likely to affect the tone of the impeachment inquiry, albeit it starts in the House Judiciary Committee, but it quite likely could get to your chamber?
Well, I think what I'm hearing from all candidates, House and Senate, who are out there running, is that the American people want this dealt with in a fair way, but they also want us to get it behind us as quickly as possible. And I'm hearing people increasingly say they do not see this thing rising to the level of high crimes and misdemeanor deserving of impeachment.
Senator Kerry, it's Jeff Greenfield. You have been crusading for years for fundamental reforms in areas like Social Security and Medicare. I mean, you've talked about the need for entitlement reform as a major issue. There seems to be a sense that in this election, the electorate basically was reasonably content, bothered perhaps by some Republican tactics, but had no great vision of where they wanted to be taken by the political leadership. Do you see anything in these returns tonight that suggests that the public is ready to confront very hard issues?
Well, yes. I mean, for one thing, it was a very high voter turnout. I mean, we had a larger than expected turnout, so I think it's an indication that people are ready, willing, and able to participate. But we're going to have to lead. I mean, when it comes to Social Security and Medicare and long-term care portion of Medicaid, we've got to lead. We've got to tell the American people where we're going and why we need to change the direction of the country.
Given the ads, though, that we saw on both sides, that suggested that anyone raising the issue of changing some of these entitlement reforms was ready to throw widows and orphans out into the snow, is the political climate such that you believe you can put hard decisions on the table and get the support of the public?
Well, we're going to have to change it. If the political climate isn't there, we're going to have to change it, because the demography of the United States of America is driving this problem forward. And we're converting our entire budget into an ATM machine, transferring increasing shares of our budget and our income. And, you know, it's being driven by a demographic trend in the form of the baby boom generation, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's going forward. So either we change the political climate or we're going to be replaced by people who will do it for us.
Senator, it's Judy Woodruff in Atlanta. Yes. Will tonight's results have any bearing at all on your decision whether or not to seek the presidency?
No, other than it's over. And I had made a commitment to myself to make a decision by the end of the year. So I'm closer to the end of the year, and as a consequence, closer to the decision.
Well, it's November 3rd. Do you want to give us a peek or into your wheels turning in your mind? Or
it really is. It gets down, Judy, to a question of whether or not I want to serve my country as president. I did not want the job bad enough in '91 and '92, and it showed. And I do not intend to become a candidate and repeat those mistakes.
All right. Senator Bob Kerry, we thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, the Balance of Power desk over at CNN Center right here, just a few feet from where we are sitting. Frank Sesno, you've got a lot to talk about there. We've got all sorts of Senate results that have come in. There's a few governor races that are still outstanding, but definitely something in the Senate to look at.
Well, Judy, we haven't worn down the batteries in our calculators just yet as we look at the balance of power in the Senate and the House and among the governors. But let's start with the Senate, if we can. Coming into this evening, as you're well aware, the Democrats were behind the Republicans. The Republicans had 55 seats, the Democrats 45. Here's the way it looks right now. It's 54 for the Republicans, 43 for the Democrats. There are 3 undecided. Among those undecided, the tightest in Wisconsin and Nevada. We will see what happens there. And it could well be that not much changes in the overall balance. That would be good news for the Democrats. They were trying to protect their flanks. The Republicans thought they'd pick up a couple of seats. Bruce Morton has been watching this closely along with me all night. Bruce, and I know you want to start in California.
Well, that was a race the Republicans really thought they might win, and for a long time, Barbara Boxer did indeed look very vulnerable. She was rescued, it turns out, by the good old reliable Democratic friend, the gender gap. She ran just barely behind among men. She had a whopping advantage among women. And one other thing, even though Matt Fong, her Republican opponent, is an Asian American, she carried Asians. Now, I don't know what accounts for that, but she did it. In Illinois, Carol Mausley-Brown had spent most of the time trying to get the campaign focused on anything but her own problems. That didn't work. One measure of the degree to which it didn't work is that in 1992, people were angry about Anita Hill. People were angry at the Senate Judiciary Committee. She got a lot of white suburban Republican women to vote for her. She got 51% of the white women 6 years ago, just 41% of those same people today. That's a 10-point drop, and that probably accounts for why she lost. And then there's Kentucky, which, to be perfectly honest, it was just a dogfight. I don't Frank have any wonderful explanations for that. It was very long, very drawn out, and you know, the baseball player beat the basketball player. What can I say?
It was especially nasty, too.
It was especially nasty, too. In Washington, Patty Murray, the mom in tennis shoes, now the two-term senator in tennis shoes, just won pretty generally. Linda Smith was behind in almost every age category, income category, and so on.
So we will watch how these last few seats play out to determine what the real balance of power is going to be over in the Senate. Among the governors, now this has been a very interesting night out in the states. Coming into tonight, the governors broke down along these lines. The Republicans held 32 governorships, the Democrats 17, 1 independent. The way it is right now, 27 Republicans, 17 Democrats, and 5 undecided. Gene Meserve, we start with the biggest upset in Iowa.
That's right. Jim Ross Lightfoot was considered a favorite here. He was the darling of the Republican Party in Iowa because he almost defeated Tom Harkin in 1990 in the Senate race. He had high name ID. He had a lot of money. His opponent, Tom Vilsack, was relatively unknown, but he was young. He was energetic. He put on a good campaign, and Frank, he pulled it out. Abortion and choice played a gigantic role in that race. In fact, at one point, fairly recently, as this came down, Jim Ross Lightfoot pulled in the McCoys, the parents of those septuplets, and said, this is all about life. That's what this is all about. And Tom Vilsack was someone who favored abortion rights. From our exit polling, it's hard to tell exactly how this issue cut. 53% of women went for Vilsack, but so did 52% of men. The issue that really seemed to play for Vilsack was education. He said he wanted to improve education and then cut taxes. Lightfoot took exactly the opposite approach, said he wanted to cut taxes first and then work on education. One thing I want to mention, we've been talking a lot tonight about Democratic victories. I should say there were at least 3 competitive governor's races which the Democrats have lost, and those were in Rhode Island, Ohio, and New Mexico. A couple of other updates for you in Minnesota, where Jesse the Body Ventura is on the ballot with 32% of the vote in. Ventura is in the lead with 37%, followed by Norm Coleman with 32% and Skip Humphrey with 31%. And finally, another race we've been following, the lieutenant governor race in Texas. We're curious about that because we want to know if George W. Bush has coattails. And if he makes a presidential bid, obviously this person becomes key. Right now, with 49% of the vote in, we see the Republican Rick Perry with 50% of the vote. Okay, so now to the House of Representatives, the United States House of Representatives. Just to remind you, once again, coming in this evening, of course, the Republicans held the advantage there. Not a very big one, though. It was 228 for the Republicans, 206 for the Democrats, and 1 independent. Where does it stand right now? Well, it's been quite a night, although not as much of a shocker there as in other places. But as of this moment, 176 seats belong to the Republicans, 157 to the Democrats, 102 undecided. But there's a headline lurking there, Stu Rothenberg.
Well, Frank, in this hectic rash of returns, I try to step back and see what's going on, and it looks as though Republican incumbents are doing slightly less well compared to Democratic incumbents. For example, in New Mexico, Republican Bill Redmond, who won a special election in northern New Mexico, has gone down to defeat against Attorney General Tom Udall. In Kansas, Vince Snowbarger has been defeated by Democratic challenger Dennis Moore, a prosecutor. In Pennsylvania, suburban Philadelphia, John Fox continues to trail his opponent Joe Huffle. The only Democrat who appears to be going down, or at least at this point is in deep trouble, is Jay Johnson. This is in a Green Bay district in Wisconsin. It is one of the few Democrats who's in trouble. But, Frank, I want to emphasize, not every Republican incumbent is going down here. Steve Chabot, for example, who was a top Democratic target, has won.
And it is our estimate, it is CNN's estimate, that the Democrats will net gain 3 seats tonight. An extraordinary turn of events. If you recall, it was Newt Gingrich not very long ago who said the Republicans could win up to 40. Won't happen. Bernie?
Frank, you reported there are 3 outstanding Senate races. Make that 2, because in the 50th state, the Iowa state, Republican incumbent Dan Inouye is going back to Washington for his 7th term. Inouye defeating Crystal Young, who posed very little challenge to the senator from Hawaii. When we come back, we're going to hear again from Mike McCurry and Tony Blankley, and more on CNN's Election 98 coverage. We're going to have our CNN contributors Tony Blankley and Mike McCurry join us again from Washington. But first, we're going to go to a former White House chief of staff under President Clinton and a former California congressman in his own right, Leon Panetta, who's in New York. What's it like up there?
Well, Bernie, it's a pretty exciting town if you're a Democrat with the win by Chuck Schumer. That was one that, frankly, everybody thought would be very close, and I think it's a good win if you're a Democrat.
If you're a Democrat. What about what's happened in your home state? Gray Davis, lieutenant governor, reclaiming the State House for you Democrats out there.
Bernie, that was anticipated over a long period of time. I think ever since the primary, Gray Davis has held, it was 8 points, 10 points, 12 points, 15 points. He seemed to be holding his ground throughout these last few months, and no matter what Dan Lundgren did to try to get back at Gray Davis, it just didn't work, and that was totally expected. The boxer race obviously was anticipated to be close, and I assume that's still a close race out there, but Barbara was doing much better at the end.
Nuts and bolts. You've got a proposition on the California ballot, Proposition 3. Talk to us about the importance of that and what happens if it is defeated, a la the year 2000, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it's, it always creates interesting problems in California with the entire initiative process, because 1 year we'll enact all kinds of election reforms. The courts will throw it out. They'll now do this with the primary to try to see if we can get something done there with regards to the presidential race. I don't think that California initiatives are the best way to conduct public policy, but obviously if it passes, it'll have some impact.
Mr. Panetta, it's Jeff Greenfield in Atlanta.
Yeah, Jeff.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Fine, thanks. You have been, from the beginning of this year, at first skeptical about the president in relationship to the Lewinsky issue, and then very critical. Let me ask you bluntly, do these results, you think, encourage the idea in the White House that this ends it, that it lets the president off the hook from accountability?
Well, I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't draw the conclusion that it ends the process by any means. I think the process is going to continue as soon as the Congress comes back. Don't forget, these are lame duck members that are still going to conduct the process in the Judiciary Committee, so I think it's going to go forward. But I also think that the election takes some of the steam out of the impeachment process because there's a clear signal here, I think, if the Republicans pay attention to it, that the public wants this thing resolved. They don't want it to continue. They don't want it to go on endlessly. And I think that's a signal that probably the White House can take some comfort in.
Are you surprised?
No, I'm not, because I think the American people were saying this for a long time, that they were frustrated by the fact that this was consuming so much time in Washington. They cared a lot more about the issues that impact on their families. They wanted the Congress to move on. I think that was pretty clear from all the polls. I think it was pretty clear from the people I talked to. So I don't see anything different in terms of the signals that were sent tonight.
Ms. Panetta, it's Judy Woodruff, also in Atlanta. You say this takes some of the steam out of the impeachment process. How exactly does it do that? I mean, you've served in the House for a long time. How exactly would this thing slow down, if you will?
Well, Judy, as you know, this is a political process that we're in with regards to impeachment. It's not a judicial process. It is a political process. And I think if the Republicans thought that there was political gain to be achieved here by continuing to press on the impeachment process, then obviously they would continue to push it as they tried to do in the last few weeks before the election. But I think that the message tonight is that the American people care a lot more about issues that affect their families. They're tired of the impeachment process. They want it ended. And I think if the Republicans are smart, they'll get that signal and they'll try to resolve this sooner rather than later.
Leon Panetta, thank you very much for joining us.
Good, thank you.
And here is Alfonse D'Amato, the soon-to-be ex-senator from New York.
Governor Pataki, Libby Pataki, our First Lady, my daughter Lisa. I won't tell you how many others. We spent 11 of us. When they tell you you should only put 6 people in an elevator, listen to them. Because we spent 25 minutes trapped between the 44th and 45th floor.
Not able to move our arms.
We finally got Mayor Giuliani to get the emergency services there to get us out. Thank you, Mayor. I can tell you this. I'm lucky that Mama wasn't in there. I would have been in big trouble. I want to tell you, to all of my New Yorkers, I am, well, I am deeply grateful to each and every New Yorker who has given me the opportunity to do that which I've loved the most, to work and to fight and to attempt to make a difference for the people of our great state. And we've come a long way, and we've had a lot of triumphs. And I have to tell you that tonight in your vote, there was a reaffirmation of that by the election of our great Governor George Pataki, because he's going to continue to work to make this state a better place for all of our citizens. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, people of every stripe. And I have to tell you, that's what it's about. I've been honored. Never in my wildest dreams would I ever have thought, when I graduated Syracuse Law School and came back home to the little village of Island Park, my hometown, and the people who've supported me and who I love. Never, when my mama went out campaigning me for the first time, did I think that I would ever have the privilege of serving the people for 18 years. I tell you, time doesn't permit me to thank everyone who has been so special in my effort, particularly in this last battle. But I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my family, my mama who crisscrossed the state, my daughter Lisa and Lorraine, my entire family, and my extended family. My great chairman, Bill Powers, who worked day in and day out, and Mike Long, my Conservative Party chairman, and not only a great mayor, but a great public servant and friend, Mayor Ed Koch, who was there day in and day out. And Mayor Giuliani, who came in there and did everything he could to make a difference. And my friend, Ambassador Gargano, who started the trip with me. But let me tell you that there is a special person. And does she demonstrate love and loyalty to this state, to our great governor? And she showed me friendship that went above and beyond. She absolutely carried the mantle of leadership in this battle. And I tell you, we have one great First Lady, Libby Pataki. Thank you. And our great governor, how proud I am of him. And let me tell you, he would have smashed every election record there ever was, were it not for the fact that he reached out, he took time, he worked day in, day out to help our campaign. Thank you, Governor, for the great job that you've done and you continue to do. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I had the opportunity, and I would have come down here and done.
As we listen to these rather gracious concession remarks from New York Senator Alfonse D'Amato, thanking so many people involved in his campaign effort, let's bring back our analyst Mike McCurry and Tony Blankley. Mike McCurry, what would be the reaction at the White House tonight watching Alfonse D'Amato go down to defeat?
Well, it is a predictable one. He has been a distinctive voice on the national scene, to be sure, but I think at the White House they remember, and probably voters in New York remember, the time and effort the senator put into exploring and investigating the Whitewater matter. In fact, you can probably go back and trace his downward spiral in the polls with the voters of New York and to that moment. So there'll be some satisfaction. Look, next to the President of the United States, the two happiest people at the White House tonight are going to be Mrs. Clinton, who I think tirelessly campaigned around the country, and in a lot of these races tonight, I think she did make a big difference. And then also the Vice President. The Vice President, I think, has been out on the road working very, very hard on behalf of these candidates. There'll be a lot of satisfaction tonight that they went out and raised up issues that gave a lot of room for candidates on the Democratic side to campaign. This is about, you know, people were saying this is going to be the Seinfeld election about nothing. It ended up, that's not the case. It is about something.
I mean, I agree, but it seems to me that the Republican Party in Congress is going to be somewhat conflicted because they have a heartfelt belief, I'd say about 190, 200 members in the House, that the president has committed impeachable conduct. And now they're looking at this election and they're probably going to draw some inference that it's not good politics to follow their convictions. My guess is they're going to follow their convictions and we're going to have a vote on impeachment. I don't know exactly which way it goes, but I don't think this is putting it behind, even though the political judgment might be that it's best to drop it. I don't think in their hearts they're prepared to drop it. So it's going to be a very difficult period for the Republicans particularly, I think.
This election is telling those members of the House to bring this matter to an honorable and a common sense conclusion, and I think that's what
I agree. That's the message. But the point is sometimes politicians think there's something they're obliged to do. And from my talking with members over the months, I think most of them think that they have an obligation, whatever you might think, or whatever the public might think, they think there's an obligation to move forward with this. So I think they're deeply conflicted. And just to close the thought, I think that my sense, watching this election tonight, I don't know exactly how yet, but it's going to have deeper ramifications within the Republican Party than one might have expected.
But Tony, go ahead, Mike. You were about
I was just going to say there are two models of what will happen now. There'll either be a bitter partisan reaction to this election result, and we will plunge back into the question of impeachment, or a more hopeful scenario. The parties can come together and work in that bipartisan fashion that we need to address an issue like Social Security. And with that issue looming on the horizon, I think that is probably a more hopeful and optimistic future, and one that I think the election results suggest the Congress should follow.
It's possible it could be both. I think it could work on Social Security and go forward, yeah.
Tony Blankley, you know the House very well. Are you suggesting that tonight's results don't take any of the steam out of the train that's rolling down the impeachment track?
No, it does take steam out. It's certainly going to put a pause in the minds of a lot of people, members. But my point was that I think there's going to be a real internal conflict within members themselves who are going to say, gee, I really think this requires articles of impeachment, and yet I've looked at the election and it's not good politics. So will they go bad politics and good policy from their point of view? I don't know how it breaks, but it's going to be a struggle within individuals' minds, I think, as well as between some members.
On that point, Tony, you alluded to it about 2 minutes ago. Elaborate on that. I hear you saying that there's really going to be hell to pay within the Republican Party when they start looking at these results tomorrow.
I don't know whether I'm not sure whether it's hell to pay. I think that deep thinking is going to follow on this, because this has been a bad election for Republicans any way you look at it. And I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking. What are the issues? How do we deal? What's our political technology? Is it working properly or not? Why didn't we get our vote out? I think there's a lot of stuff there. I don't know that it's a personal conflict as much as a technical, professional one.
Mike McCurry, several dozen or 100 of us received lengthy faxes from someone who shall be described as a political advisor to Vice President Gore, detailing all the trips he had made and the effort he had put in. Do you think now the White House, to some extent, shifts into a legacy mode, starts even more deliberately trying to elevate Vice President Gore to the inevitable nominee for the year 2000?
Well, I doubt very much that the Vice President is immediately going to want to step out of the shadow of the President of the United States. I think, if anything, the White House has to concentrate on building on this success tonight, not overplaying its hand. I think the President has to be very careful about refocusing his energy and the energy of the White House on the substantive agenda that he wants to pursue. That's the only way you achieve a legacy, is to achieve real results. And my guess is tonight at the White House, they're thinking about how they can take the substance that was behind some of these election results, build on it, find a way to bring people together, and look to the State of the Union address in January of next year as a moment to set forth a new agenda and not be, brought down or burdened by the question of impeachment.
Mike, we're going to ask you and Tony to take a coffee break, but don't leave the studio in Washington. This is much too good coming from both of you. And when we return on this Election 98 coverage, we're going to take a look at Republicans who tried to tie Democrats to Bill Clinton. In the Middle West, there's one Senate race CNN is saying is still too close to call. We're talking about Wisconsin. Incumbent Democrat Russ Feingold, as you see, being challenged by Mark Newman, 49% of precincts N, but this is still too close to call. Bill Delaney is watching things from Madison.
Yes, Bernie, this is very much a cliffhanger. That's no surprise to anyone here at Senator Russ Feingold's headquarters in Middleton, Wisconsin, just outside Madison, the capital. An atmosphere of cautious optimism here now, primarily because the buzz in this ballroom is all about turnout. And the Feingold people, Senator Feingold people say turnout is cutting the way they wanted it to. And that means in the major metropolitan centers, Milwaukee, Madison, the turnout has been big. So big here in Dane County, where the capital, Madison, is, that in parts of Madison, we're told, they ran out of ballots. Now, we spoke to the campaign manager of Senator Feingold. They're quite upset about that. People were online, in one case, at least 100 people online, and they couldn't vote because there weren't enough ballots, and some of them went home. Senator Russell Feingold's people obviously concerned that some of those people who went home in their stronghold may have been Feingold supporters. We are getting some local polling here, which seems to indicate a bit of an edge for Senator Russell Feingold, the incumbent here who refused soft money, who has been outspent by his challenger, Republican Congressman Mark Newman, about 2-1, and very much out-advertised on television. Most people here consider Senator Russell Feingold's campaign the most idealistic in the country. At the same time, we talked to Republican challenger Newman's people down in Janesville, a couple hours south of here. They're also saying, well, let's wait and see. The metropolitan areas, big turnout, that will cut in Feingold's direction. But Newman concentrated most of his energy outside the metropolitan centers. That's where most of his support is, and we're still very much waiting for those precincts to come in. We've only got about 45% of the vote tallied so far. So this very much the cliffhanger that everyone expected. This race that last summer was Senator Feingold's to lose. He was ahead by 15, 20 points. Congressman Mark Newman running a very smart campaign. Very smart campaign. So we wait for the results here. We expect them in the next couple of hours, and we'll be here. We'll be here. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, and let me just add a partisan word. Madison, Wisconsin is one great place to go to college, if you have to go to college. We've heard earlier about the Republican Party's efforts late in this political season to perhaps tie Democratic candidates to the Clinton-Lewinsky matter. CNN's Brooks Jackson has looked into that. Brooks, how did they do?
Well, Jeff, as we've been reporting for days, the Republican Party spent millions of dollars in the closing days of the campaign to raise the Monica Lewinsky affair in congressional districts. They told us, the Republicans did, and I reported earlier that those ads ran in 22 congressional districts. An update, we now discover there were 30 congressional districts in which ads ran. That's about half the districts that Republicans considered at all marginal. We're going to take a look at part of one of those ads now.
What'd you tell your kids? I didn't know what to say. It's wrong. For 7 months he lied to us. But aren't there other things to do? And say it's okay to lie? Besides, the Republicans are doing them. They cut taxes.
Now, how well did that work? We've been keeping a tally, and so far of the races that have been decided, Democrats have won 14 of those races, Democratic House members elect now, and Republicans have only won 5. So the Lewinsky ads have not worked very well. Bernie?
Okay, thanks very much, Brooks Jackson. Joining us now, a powerful Democrat in the United States Senate. He leads the Senate for his party, Tom Daschle of South Dakota. Senator, you've been counting noses and watching what's happening. Your impressions?
Well, Bernie, we're very, very pleased. Obviously, this is not the results that most people had projected. They were talking about a filibuster-proof Congress. That isn't going to happen. In fact, we may end up picking up a seat, and so we're ecstatic tonight.
What happened? How did you do it, party-wise?
Well,
Obviously, we're outspent by more than $110 million, and that was the biggest concern we had, was how could we deal with those ads? How could we deal with all the money being thrown at us? I think it was the agenda. I think it was working so closely in a coordinated effort with the White House, the House, and the Senate. Our unity campaign really made a difference, and we're going to try to repeat it every cycle from here on out if this was the result.
Senator, what does this do to the impeachment investigation in the House?
I think it's got to take some of the steam out of it. Obviously, no one really knows yet. This is going to be a decision that House members are going to have to make, but they can't feel very good about prolonging this, given the results tonight.
Is this in some measure a vindication for the president? Tonight's results, I mean.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that you can read too much into it one way or the other. It's certainly a strong indication of the support that the president has with regard to the policies that he's articulated. No one can take that away from him. He has made it very clear what his agenda, working with Democrats in Congress, is and will be, and I think the American people tonight said resoundingly they want to see more of it.
Is there any doubt in your mind what the agenda will be for the White House next year?
I don't think there's any doubt at all. Obviously, we've got to go back to some of the key questions that we've been talking about that we weren't able to complete this year. Patients' Bill of Rights, a good education program, making sure that Social Security and Medicare are sound, improving the quality of life for working families. That's what we'll be talking about, and that agenda, I think, is what the American people expect of us.
All right, Senator Tom Daschle, the Democratic leader in the Senate. Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome.
We've been speculating about 2000, but try this one on for size. Right now in Minnesota, in a tight three-way race, the leading candidate is Jesse Ventura, Jesse the Body Ventura, the Reform Party candidate for governor of Minnesota. Now, let's assume that he holds on to this lead and becomes the first Reform Party candidate elected to statewide office. That might make him the leading candidate for the Reform Party presidential nomination in the year 2000. The party that Ross Perot ran on in 1992 and 1996. Impossible? Well, just remember this. Thanks to federal campaign finance laws, the Reform Party candidate for president in 2000 would get an approximate $20 million worth of federal campaign funds, which is enough to put on a fairly reasonable campaign. There is just one caveat. The last time someone other than Ross Perot tried to run for president on the Reform Party ticket in 1996, Ross Perot showed up the next day, and that was that. We'll be back in a moment. Even with all the excitement of tonight, we cannot forgo returning to ads we love or ads we love to hate. Political commercials past and present that have caught our eye for one reason or another. Frank says no. Fess up.
All right, here goes. You know, we talk about how negative things have got, how much mud is thrown, how nasty the language is. Let's go back to 1968, tumultuous year, Vietnam, assassinations, when words alone wouldn't do. Pretty funny ad when you look back on it, Jeff. But you know what? We know what happened. Richard Nixon won, Spiro Agnew resigned, and not very many people were laughing.
This is true. Comes time now for me to bring you an ad. This is from the D'Amato-Schumer campaign about which you have heard. I want you to take a look at this ad that Senator D'Amato's campaign ran only in upstate New York and listen to it and see if you think that there may be a hint of an ethnic message here. Let's roll them.
They're back. Sheldon Silver and the New York City Democrats just picked a New York City liberal for every major statewide office. They're back. New York City liberals have plans for higher taxes and more spending. And you know what that means. Higher taxes for us, more spending for them. Upstate New York deserves better. Vote against Sheldon Silver and the New York City Democrats.
You know, it occurs to me that one of the problems with that ad might have been that upstate New York Republicans had a warmer feeling for New York City because for the last 7 years or so, it's been governed by a Republican mayor, Rudy Giuliani. We'll be back in a moment. We often say in America that anybody can grow up to be president, but if you want to get into politics, it sure doesn't hurt to have a member of the family in the business. For example, Governor Evan Bayh, the newly elected senator from Indiana, son of former senator and presidential hopeful Birch Bayh. Representative Ken Benson, nephew of former Senator and Treasury Secretary Lloyd Benson. Congresswoman Mary Bono from California, the widow of the late entertainer and Congressman Sonny Bono. Jeb Bush, the newly elected governor of Florida, son of President George Bush, as is Governor George W. Bush of Texas. Bob Taft, the newly elected governor of Ohio, great-grandson of President William Howard Taft, the grandson of a U.S. senator, the son of another senator. Hubert Humphrey III, Skip Humphrey, running, perhaps losing for governor of Minnesota, son of former Vice President Hubert Humphrey. Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., son of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Lieutenant Governor Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, daughter of the late Robert Kennedy. Representative Patrick Kennedy, son of Senator Edward Kennedy. Mark Udall, son of Mo Udall, former congressman and presidential candidate. Tom Udall, son of Stuart Udall, Interior Secretary in the Kennedy administration. Perhaps you get the idea. By the way, the Bush brothers are also grandsons of Prescott Bush, a United States senator from Connecticut. We'll be back in just a moment with a recap and some calls if we've got them.
It is 12 midnight, Wednesday morning on the East Coast, 9 p.m. on the West Coast. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Bernard Shaw, here's Judy Woodruff and Jeff Greenfield. It has been a very exciting night, and we continue to look at the races on this Election 98. We're going to take a look at some calls. CNN is declaring in Alaska that Governor Tom Knowles, the incumbent, has won. He's turned back his challenge from John Lindauer. Also in Alaska, this is no surprise, incumbent Frank Mikulski will go back to Washington. He defeated Joseph Sonoman.
And Alaska is the state where the polls have just closed, but let's go back now and look at some of the other races we've called and some of those that we haven't called yet. Let's take a look. In New York, Charles Schumer, the winner over the incumbent Republican Alfonse D'Amato. You can see the raw vote there with almost 90% of the precincts in. In the California Senate race, CNN has declared Barbara Boxer will be the winner. However, with just 8% of the vote reporting, you can see it's still early in the count, but Barbara Boxer the winner.
In the governor's race in California, Lieutenant Governor Gray Davis takes the governor's mansion for the Democrats, beating Dan Lundgren, the Attorney General. And in Texas, George W. Bush Jr. soundly defeats his opponent and vaults to the fore as the putative frontrunner for the 2000 race. His brother Jeb does what he couldn't do 4 years ago, wins the governorship of Florida, beating Lieutenant Governor Buddy McKay.
In Alabama, this is the winner here, Mr. Siegelmen over Governor James, Fob James. South Carolina, the Democrat wins the State House over Governor Beasley. And also in South Carolina, Fritz Hollings hung on tonight. He's going back to Washington. He defeats Mr. Inglis.
In the Tar Heel state, a Democrat moves into the Senate seat held by Lauch Faircloth. John Edwards is going to Washington. Here in Georgia, Roy Barnes, another Democrat, holds on for his party, defeating Guy Milner and the independent Mr. Cashin. In Kentucky, this one was tight all along. CNN has declared Jim Bunning, but as you can see, with 99% of the precincts reporting, this is a hair separating these two members of Congress. Looks like 150 votes.
That Kentucky Senate race is the barn burner of the night, and we are going to Kentucky to David Enser, who will give us the very latest. David.
Jeff, what a roller coaster ride this has been here at the Bunning headquarters in northern Kentucky, and I imagine it has been across the way, across the state at the other headquarters as well. Through the evening, this crowd has been cheering 9,000, 10,000 vote leads, and reporting from various sources that it looked like their man had won. And then the Jefferson County votes came in. Jefferson County is where Louisville is. That's a strong Democratic area. And the Democratic candidate, Scotty Basler, won that by 22,000 votes. At that point, that was the count. That put Basler in the lead. And at the moment, he has a slight lead, only by a few hundred votes. And there are still several counties in the western end of the state to be counted. Now, many here and some Democrats also say those are predominantly Republican counties, but we're not talking about large populations. This is really going to go down to the wire. And in fact, over at Scotty Basler's headquarters, the Democratic candidate has already announced that he's had enough. He's going to go to bed and see what happens tomorrow morning. Here's what he said.
We appreciate you coming. We're going home now. We're going to wait till tomorrow. And we're going to look and see what the situation is. At that time, we'll look over the whole circumstances of all the counties. I mean, you're talking about 1/10 of 1% out of 1 million and something votes. Obviously, I appreciate everything everybody has done because it's been a fantastic race. And I will say this. We haven't done anything in this race that I'm displeased with or not proud of, and I wouldn't have done anything different, whatever the outcome is. So I really appreciate it.
So we understand there's a recount going on now in Jefferson County. That's the Louisville area that had the 22,000 vote lead for the Democrat. That's going to be re-examined. There's still a few counties yet to go. It's going right down to the wire here in Kentucky, Jeff.
Thank you. You know, no matter how many computers you have, sooner or later, there comes a race that you have to count them one vote at a time. Bill Schneider, they're in counting votes in California, which is these days the biggest prize for any party, and the Democrats had a very good night. Why?
Yes, they did indeed. The prize of California governor is very important. He has the power to veto the reapportionment of 1/8 of the Congress. You know, the Democrats have lost the last 4 elections for governor, 4 of them in California, and in each of them, the first 2 they nominated an African American, the last 2 they nominated a woman. This time they nominated a white man, Gray Davis. He can't help it. He's a white man. Look at how he did among white voters in California. This is remarkable. It's unusual for a Democrat to do this well. He held Dan Lundgren, the Republican. He actually edged him out 50 to 48 among white voters. That doesn't happen very often. Earlier, I pointed out that the economy is the big factor behind tonight's big Democratic victory across the country. And it worked in an interesting way in California. After 16 years of Republican governors, you'd think that voters happy with the economy would vote for continuity. But they did not. They voted for change, for a Democrat. What does this prove? It proves that the issue wasn't the Wilson economy, it's the Clinton economy. As you can see here, the better you thought the state's economy was, the more likely you were to vote for Davis. And the voters of California thought their economy was very good indeed. Almost 80% said it was in excellent or good shape. And finally, here's an issue that paid off for Democrats big time in California and across the country. The top issue in the California race was education. Democrats talked about it everywhere. As you can see, those voters who said education was their major concern voted almost 3 to 1 for Gray Davis, the Democrat, over Dan Lundgren. This was an issue that worked very well for Democrats in California and elsewhere. Judy? Bernie.
Okay, Bill Schneider, thanks very much. When we come back, we're going to talk to Bill Press from Crossfire. He's a former California Democratic Party chairman. It should be very interesting to hear his thoughts. Back in a moment with more coverage on this election 92. CNN is declaring a winner in that cliffhanger of a race in the Senate in Wisconsin. CNN projects that when all the ballots are counted, incumbent Democrat Russ Feingold will have turned back a mighty challenge by Republican Mark Newman. Our man Bill Delaney is just outside Madison, Wisconsin. Bill?
Yes, indeed, Bernie. The room here has just erupted. They got the word that Senator Russell Feingold in this high road, very high-risk campaign has won, and as you can see, presumably behind me, the room has come alive. They've been waiting 3 or 4 hours now. It was a bit of a cliffhanger, chanting the senator's name. This result, Bernie, likely to resonate well beyond the borders of this relatively small state with only 3.8 million voters, because Senator Russ Feingold won this with very severe spending limitations. He didn't spend any soft money. His opponent did. He was out-advertised. He was outspent. But he's won here tonight in Wisconsin. Bernie?
Bill Delaney, so many of those limitations self-imposed by the senator. Bill Schneider has been watching the exit polls. He looks closer at what's happening in Wisconsin as we've just declared Russ Feingold the winner. Bill?
Well, you know, Bernie, what's interesting is that Wisconsin was a state where Tommy Thompson, the moderate Republican governor, won a solid re-election, but the more conservative Mark Newman got defeated in his bid for the Senate. I think this really epitomizes the 2 faces of the Republican Party. A lot of moderate Republican governors, Pataki, New York, Ridge in Pennsylvania, Thompson in Wisconsin, all got handily reelected. But a lot of members of Congress did not do particularly well. We found that 58% of self-described moderate voters, that's about half the electorate, voted for Thompson, but only 41% of moderates voted for Newman. I think there's going to be a split in the Republican Party coming between the governor's wing, which is dominated by pragmatists and moderate Republicans who are inclusive in their appeal, and the congressional wing of the Republican Party, which is dominated by conservative ideologues. Why are the two wings different? Well, clearly, governors represent a whole state, so they have to represent a more diverse constituency, and they have to run a government and make things work, whereas members of Congress have much smaller constituencies in the House of Representatives, and they can be more ideological and more partisan. So I think we're going to see this division getting bigger and bigger, and it's epitomized by the difference between these two Republican candidates in Wisconsin.
Hey, Bill, a question about the campaign finance issue, which Russ Feingold almost lost his seat over. Did the exit polls show that among the voters, does it resonate? Do people care about campaign financing?
Well, we don't have any direct data on the campaign finance issue, but clearly I think for Feingold in a very good Democratic year to have won even a cliffhanger here is going to be a warning to Democrats, to candidates all over the country, that campaign finance reform is a very dangerous issue because he lived by those rules. He said, I'm going to abide by the rules, and he almost lost. So I think even though he won this election, it's really the message that he's sending is, if you try to compete and not spend money, and your message is, I'm going to compete by saving money, by not accepting PAC contributions from special interest groups, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because the message is, he almost got beaten in a good Democratic year.
Thank you, Bill Schneider. California now has 2 Democratic senators, and as of January, a Democratic governor. Bill Press, who you know best from Crossfire, used to be executive director of the Democratic Party of California. Bill, I don't think any results like that happened under your watch. What happened now to the Democrats in California?
Jeff, it's the strong foundation that was built by the former Democratic chair. Actually, I wouldn't say that because that would be wrong. I'll tell you what happened out there. You had 2 excellent candidates. The most important race in the entire nation tonight, of course, the California governor's race. Gray Davis rose to the challenge. He was able to paint, with Dan Lundgren's help, Dan Lundgren as an extremist. That probably means not only do we pick up the most important race tonight, but 10 more Democrats in the House of Representatives in the year 2000. And of course, in the Senate race, Barbara Boxer counted out a year ago, counted out 6 months ago. She's a tremendous campaigner. The president, the first lady, Al Gore were out there raising money for her, and she also had the luck of the draw with Matt Fong shooting himself in the head in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, giving $50,000 to an extremist organization. Barbara Boxer back to the Senate. I got a big smile on my face tonight.
We've heard all over the country that in the last days of this campaign, the Democratic Party poured in millions of dollars in targeted get-out-the-vote efforts. The president, the vice president, appearing in African-American neighborhoods, giving interviews on black entertainment television and Hispanic stations, doing pre-recorded phone calls by the tens of thousands. Did that have resonance in California, too?
Oh, it did. There was a very big get-out-the-vote effort in California, run, I might add, by a coordinated campaign of the California Democratic Party, and it was targeted to absentee ballots, getting as many absentees in from women and from labor and from minorities, and then going out on election day door to door and turning out the vote. Labor was particularly strong there, the way they were in the spring, and that makes a difference. You got to get the people out to vote. They did in California.
Bill Press, thank you very much.
Good to join you guys.
Okay, and we will be back with the big picture when we return.
Well, it's 9:18 p.m. in the West, 12:18 in the East, and CNN is prepared to make a call at this hour. In the Nevada governor's race, it is a pickup for the Republicans. Kenny Gwynn, the winner, former Las Vegas educator, a winner over the Democrat Jan Laverty Jones. She's the mayor of Las Vegas. Well, Frank says no. We've got some governor results. We've been talking about those. And by my count, there's only one Senate race that's still hanging out there. In other words, enough numbers for you to put all this in perspective.
We'll try, Judy. Let us take you right to the United States Senate, where, as you know, the Republicans held an edge coming in. Here's where it stands right now. If our numbers come up, if they cooperate with us, if they don't, we'll tell you that what it all amounts to so far is a wash. So far, it's a wash. Now, in this remaining race, we may see it. I believe we have it there. And now over to the House. That's what we've got, with all 435 seats up tonight. Right now, the Republicans holding 193, the Democrats 171, 71 undecided. Within those numbers, we can tell you there is no net gain. So far, it's just an even trade. Over to the Senate. There you see it. The Republicans right now holding 54, the Democrats 44. 2 remaining. So if the suspense is getting to you, don't go anywhere, because we'll answer those questions, those remaining 2, eventually. To the governor's races. These are very important and have been most interesting this evening. Coming into this evening's races, the governors broke down: 32 for the Republicans, 17 for the Democrats, 1 independent. Right now, 28 governors for the Republicans, 18 Democrats, 3 undecided. Now, all through this evening, we've been hearing a lot about which constituencies have turned out to vote. We've been hearing a lot. Jeff Greenfield just mentioned the intensive get-out-the-vote efforts on the part of the Democrats. They spent $30 million to get out the vote on the phone, in radio, advertising, all of that. Now, we have obtained from a senior Democratic official some of the ads, some of the phone calls that were made, and they're most interesting. Here it says, Principal President Clinton, he was out making the generic get-out-the-vote call. This is a recorded call. It gets dialed right into your home whether you want to hear it or not. The target, African Americans. And it said, in part, I need the help of strong Democratic leaders to turn aside that radical Republican leadership that would rather spend money on investigations than on real solutions that help real people. You might have heard that phone call. Here's another one. President Clinton, generic get out the vote call, target Latino. Another one. President Clinton, generic radio, Latino, and on they go. They may have paid dividends. Gene Meserve been watching the governors, Stu Rothenberg, the House of Representatives, and Bruce Morton, the Senate. Bruce, where are we seeing the African-American vote make the difference tonight?
Well, in the South, I think mostly, Frank. African Americans are, as you know, the most loyal bloc in the Democratic Party. And Democrats have evolved a formula in the South. Republicans can win with white votes. Democrats no longer can. And the formula varies a little from state to state depending on the size of the black population, but basically around a third of the white vote, 35% maybe, and essentially all the black vote. That worked tonight for a challenger, John Edwards in North Carolina, and for a defending senator, Fritz Hollings in South Carolina.
And in the House?
Well, interesting. I have a similar situation in the South, Frank. In southwestern Mississippi, where Mike Parker, Republican Mike Parker, has retired Democrat Ronnie Show's won. It's something of an upset. This district is 41% black. He got a big black turnout. Combine that with some white vote, he ended up the winner. And also in the North, another good example is Julia Carson, a Democratic incumbent. This is a 30% black district. A year ago, Democrats told me they were very concerned whether blacks would turn out. She could lose the district if they didn't. Obviously, they did. Julia Carson was reelected.
Critical. And in the governor's races?
Well, one place to look is Georgia. I ran into the Democrat Roy Barnes over lunch on Sunday. He told me he'd been to 4 African-American churches that morning to try and get out the vote. He knew he needed it, and he got it. In this state, African-Americans are 27% of the population, but they accounted for 30% of the voters tonight, and 90% of them voted for Roy Barnes and helped propel him to victory, Frank.
And as we know, the President of the United States making every effort to appeal to African-Americans, not only because they're a loyal voting bloc, but because they were standing by him throughout this Lewinsky scandal as well. So back over now to Judy in the National Desk.
All right, Frank, one of the things we've been saying all night long is that the voters seem to be indicating that the president's situation, the president's Lewinsky problem, was not necessarily on their minds as they were voting, and yet we were bound to interpret the results in one way or another, looking at what's going to happen with the investigation of the president, his impeachment potential. Bob Franken, you've been talking to a prominent member of the Georgia delegation on that very subject.
I have, as a matter of fact, he is the person who has been pushing impeachment the longest, talking about Bob Barr, the Republican from Georgia, who sort of admits that the wind has been taken out of the sails. As a matter of fact, that was the question. Has the wind been taken out of the sails of the impeachment effort?
I don't know whether it will take the wind out of it, but certainly if you have more members of Congress who are elected who do not believe in moving forward with a constitutional process as required by the Constitution, then that may happen. But it's just too early to tell.
The possibility, do you?
Absolutely, the possibility is there.
In about a week or so, we're going to be getting back to the impeachment hearings. The Monica Lewinsky saga is going to return to the radar screen that it really dropped off the last couple of weeks. And we're going to find out, as a matter of fact, if the election result, people are going to interpret whether the election result really was a backlash against all of this. Bernie?
Bob Franken here in the South. Let's go north to New York City. Gene Randall.
Bernie, New York City's Republican Mayor Rudy Giuliani was here a few moments ago. He did a lot of campaigning for Senator Al D'Amato, and certainly would have gotten a lot of the credit if D'Amato had won. He admitted there may be a political hit he will take because of D'Amato's defeat. But beyond this race, Bernie, Giuliani wanted to talk about the success of moderate Republicans today across the country. He said there is a message there for the national GOP as it looks toward the year 2000.
Races very closely. And I see the kind of victory that a Jeb Bush had, and I see the kind of victory that a George W. Bush had, and I see the kind of victory that a Paul Cellucci had in the most Democratic state in the country, Massachusetts. We have a Republican governor who's a Republican moderate. And maybe the party has to open itself up a little bit more, a little more balance, a little more debate about different issues so that we have a broader tent in the Republican Party, and I think we're going to do better.
Should the Republican... And at one point, though he quickly glossed over it, Giuliani said maybe there would be a moderate like Rudy Giuliani interested in the year 2000. Bernie?
Okay, thank you, Gene Randall. And to repeat, if you hadn't heard, Democrat Charlie Schumer, the congressman from Brooklyn, defeated Long Island's Alfonse D'Amato, a major upset in that New York race. Our coverage continues when we come back.
An update. We told you about Byron low-tax looper, who is the alleged murderer of his Democratic opponent, Tommy Burks, the state senator. The widow of Tommy Burks won an overwhelming victory in that state Senate race, and low-tax looper in jail got 5% of the vote. One more point. Americans have heard more than enough in this campaign about President Clinton's DNA. But just days before this election, there was a new, potentially lucky break for Mr. Clinton, the genetic study that indicated that President Thomas Jefferson did indeed father at least one child by his slave, Sally Hemings. As one historian tells it, this finding could help Mr. Clinton in impeachment hearings because it lends weight to the every president, or nearly every president does it, defense. We have no exit polls on this matter. When we return, a summing up. We will come back and tell you what happened this remarkable evening.
It is 12:28 a.m. on the East Coast, 9:28 a.m. in the West. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, this is Election 98. I'm Judy Woodruff. We're still here. I'm here with Bernard Shaw and with Jeff Greenfield, and I believe I was just told that we're going to look at some races, including a couple that we still don't have the answers in. In the state of Kentucky, with 99% of the vote, would you look at that? I can't subtract that fast, Bernie and
votes.
Jeff. It's about 500 and some votes separating the Republican Jim Bunning, the Democrat Scotty Basler. We were told this was going to go all night long, and sure enough, it is. In Colorado, with 62% of the vote, rather the precincts reporting, the Democrat Gail Shetler seems to be holding on there. This is an open seat. She's running against a Republican state treasurer, Bill Owens.
In that Minnesota governor's race, look at this. 55% of the precincts in. We show Jess the Body Ventura, the wrestler, former military guy, leading all the rest of the field there, from Skip Humphrey to Mr. Coleman. This one is very, 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 very tight. In that Nevada Senate race, we still cannot tell you who the winner will be here. With 56% of the precincts reporting, this is the way it stacks up. Mr. Ensign challenging incumbent Reed.
Well, if there's any group that can put all of this into lucid, concise perspective, it's the Capitol Gang, headed up by Mark Shields. Mark? Do it.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Welcome to Capitol Gang. I am Mark Shields with Al Hunt, Bob Novak, and Cato Byrne. Bob Novak, what is the story on this really amazing election night?
The Republicans are whining about the African-American vote, which it was a phenomenally high turnout. They're saying was walking around money, was dirty politics, but that is kind of a deflection from the fact that the Republican message was bad. Were the messengers also bad? And they have some very, very tough thinking to do, because they were really expecting, honestly, substantial gains in all these races. Very disappointing, very unexpected, and there's going to be a lot of rumbling as to whether the Speaker Gingrich should be sounding the message for the Republican Party.
Al Hunt, 2/3 of Bob Dole's electoral votes in 1996 were from the Old South. And in the South tonight, the Republicans took a pasting. Fritz Hollings reelected in South Carolina to the Senate. Republicans lose the governorship there. Republicans lose the governorship in Alabama, and the Democrats hold on to Georgia. What does it mean?
And the Democrats also win the North Carolina Senate
Absolutely,
seat.
You're right.
Look, I mean, the African-American vote turned out. There's no question of that. I think to say it was due to walking around money, as some of the people talk about, that's just nonsense. It was basically, I think, the fact that the Republicans brought him out. The Republicans brought him out with their anti-Clinton messages. They engaged in overkill in the last month and overreach, and I think that had a tremendously energizing effect. And I think as long as the Democrats can nominate mainstream, moderately conservative candidates, they have a shot at winning Southern seats. Oftentimes they don't do that, but they did do it. But it was a very good night. You know, Mark, it may well be that the Democrats will actually have a pickup in the House of as many as 4 or 5 or 6 seats. First time in this election cycle since 1822, Bob Novak covered that, that was during the era of good feelings, first time that the party holding the White House has picked up seats.
The era of good feelings?
In the sixth year.
In the sixth year, right.
Era of good feelings to the era of...
Bob Novak covered it. He was used for Monroe.
Cato Byrne, what is the message in the results tonight for Bill Clinton, and what message do you think he'll take from it?
Oh, he'll be enormously encouraged, and he has every right to be. I mean, he had a near-death experience. Who would have thought the head of the party is facing impeachment, and yet his party does not take a bath? Many of us thought an awful lot of these races have been awfully close. But Republicans thought they'd get their share of those close races. It appears that they got less than their share of those close races. There are going to be an awful lot of recriminations. I think the big story is going to be that the Lewinsky scandal wound up hurting Republicans more than Democrats, and I'll tell you why. It's substituted for a message and an agenda. You would talk to Republicans who didn't think they had to do very much because their supporters and their base so disliked Bill Clinton, they'd show up and vote for that reason. We don't have to do tax cuts, we don't need an agenda, and they've always expected, for 6 years, they've expected Bill Clinton to self-destruct. And that hasn't happened, and they've paid a very high price, that expectation.
Let me just throw out one possibility to you, and that is the Republican Party right now has one of two models to choose from. It's become, not unlike the Democratic Party of half a century ago, Southern congressional leadership, all right, which is not nationally popular. Their model is Pataki, Rowland, Engler, Tom Ridge, George W. Bush, the governors.
Two Southern governors, George Bush and Jeb Bush.
That's
They're
the model.
from the South.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, you couldn't compare them to Dick Armey. And
it's a different message.
It's a different message, absolutely.
There's going to be a very interesting meeting when the Republican governors meet down in New Orleans. This is the week after next.
Yes.
And the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Jim Nicholson, is going, and the whole Republican National Committee is going to meet with the Republican governors. And the whole message from the politicians is going to be show us the way out of the wilderness, because these guys are stuck on the mountain. Is that a question?
They may be stuck in the mountain, but the first thing they have to resolve, because it affects the perception of the parties. What did they do about this impeachment thing? And basically, Henry Hyde has been telling people for months that he thinks there may well be an impeachable offense, but he does not want to move a partisan impeachment bill to the House floor. Newt Gingrich and others have been saying we're going to do it. I'll tell you, with this election result, I think Gingrich is standing there is tremendously weak, and I think you start looking for a deal right away.
I'll go you one better. I've been saying for some time that I didn't think the Republicans had much appetite for an impeachment. Barring some new evidence or a huge win that didn't happen, I thought they've been looking for a way to sort of get out of it. Based on these results and how demoralized they're bound to be, they are more apt to repeal the 22nd Amendment and give Bill Clinton a third term. They're going to be so shell-shocked than they ought to impeach him.
Please, no. Back at 8:30, when it looked as though the Republicans were not going to have as big a gain in the House as they thought, far from losing it, I said, yeah, they couldn't go after Gingrich because there's no viable alternative. But when you lose seats
in the sixth
year, there is going to be some very hard thinking and try to find somebody else. Because
when you can legitimately blame Gingrich for something, you can blame him for the end of the Congress session, you can blame him for the lack of message, you can blame him for the way he mishandled some of the impeachment.
There's a lot of blame to go around.
Give the Democrats credit. I mean, the last 2 weeks, they had peace with the Y plantation, they had prosperity with the good economic news, and they had patriotism with John Glenn. I mean, that played well with this country.
Let me say one other thing, that in state after state, with the exception of Nevada, you had a huge gender gap. Even these losers in most of these states carried the male vote. They got blistered by the female vote. You just can't say that that's not a Republican problem.
Except, and I think this may be the most revealing thing, Gray Davis in California carried males, carried whites and carried males. Is that the model for the Democrats? That's it for Capital Gang. Stay tuned to CNN for more on this remarkable election.
Across this great land of ours, voters weren't just asked today to cast their vote on people who are running for office. They were also asked about a lot of initiatives, over 200 of them. Medical use of marijuana. In the state of Arizona, people were asked whether they should repeal the legalization. The voter said, no, don't repeal it. We want to keep on using medical marijuana for medical purposes. In Colorado, this is a yes vote. The other 4 states where the medical use of marijuana was on the ballot, the answer was yes. In Colorado, as you can see, in the state of Washington, the answer was yes. In the state of Nevada, yes. And finally, well, that's it. I thought there was one more. That's it. Now let's go to Frank Sesno for a final look at tonight's results. Frank.
And the numbers, Judy. You know, we came into this evening thinking that this was going to be some kind of movement for the Republicans. At least that's what they said. The fact that there wasn't means that while the numbers won't change that much, the attitude really will. Let's start in the United States Senate. Where are we right now? Well, as a result of the voting and the tabulations this evening, the Republicans now have 54 Senate seats, the Democrats 44. They came into this evening, Republicans 55, Democrats 45. You can see 2 undecided there, so not very much movement left to go. Let us tell you that in the Senate, 3 incumbents went down to defeat, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat. To the House now. That House was fair. I'm sorry, let's come back to the House in just a moment. First, Bruce, to you on the Senate. As we look at those numbers and think about the incumbents and what's left, your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think this is very much change, you know, but if you were going to look for a trend, I think maybe it would be that this was a fairly tough season for very ideological Republicans, not the moderates, but the social conservatives. You had Bob Inglis, a challenger, going down to Fritz Hollings in South Carolina. You had Lauch Faircloth, an incumbent, very conservative senator, going down in North Carolina. Mark Newman, the very conservative challenger to Russ Feingold in Wisconsin, also lost. So if there's a trend, maybe that's it.
All right, to the House of Representatives now. We started that one a moment ago. Let's catch up with ourselves, and we'll go there presently. 106th Congress comes in with 199 Republicans, 181 Democrats. We're still waiting to hear from 55 undecided races. 4 incumbents so far have gone down this evening, 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat. Stu Rothenberg, is it the era of the centrist there as well?
Well, Frank, I'm tempted to say that the changes in the House were both trivial and historic. They're trivial in that we're talking about small net changes. When we went into this evening, we said we didn't think very many incumbents would go down, and we've hardly had any. We have so far one Democratic incumbent defeated, 3 Republican incumbents, maybe another incumbent or 2, but this is not 1994 where lots of incumbents went down. Open seats, virtually a draw. Trivial, yes, but historic, because again, this is only the 2nd time this century that the party holding the White House has won seats in a midterm, and Frank, that's a big deal.
Okay, now to the governors. The governors came into this evening 32-17-1, 32 Republicans, 17 Democrats, 1 incumbent. The way it now stands, Republicans hold 28, Democrats 18. Jean Meserve.
I'd have to pick up on what Bruce said. It seems to be the year of the moderate. The 2 most ideological candidates, Fob James in Alabama and David Beasley in South Carolina, went down to defeat. And Ellen Sauerbrey, who ran as a conservative 4 years ago and underwent what one consultant called the political equivalent of an Elizabeth Arden makeover, she went down to defeat 2 in Maryland. You saw moderates in places like Connecticut and New York winning. Also in California, you have to look at Gray Davis, a Democrat, and say he ran a very centrist campaign, stressing issues like education and crime. Frank?
Okay, Gene, and so after all is said and done, the Democrats may wake up tomorrow and steal a line from Ronald Reagan in 1984, being both observant of the obvious and making a political statement, concluding it's morning in America. Ernie?
Frank. And now to Bill Schneider for his summary assessment of this night.
Well, Bernie, this was a big Democratic sweep, and we know what it was not. It was not a backlash for the Democrats to protest the Republicans' handling of impeachment, and it was not a pro-White House backlash because of the way Clinton has been raked over the coals in the Monica Lewinsky scandal. When we asked voters, was Clinton a factor in the way you voted? 59% said no. Bill Clinton wasn't a factor at all in the way I voted for Congress today, and about equal numbers said they voted to support Clinton and to oppose Clinton. We looked state after state to try to find a state where the Clinton backlash was a factor. Maybe it helped Chuck Schumer in New York, but that was about it. What we did find was the factor, the cause of this Democratic wasn't the landslide, but Democratic gains, unprecedented in a midterm like this, was the Clinton economy. It helped Democrats even where the Republican was the incumbent. The good economy, the Clinton economy, helped defeat Lauch Faircloth in North Carolina and Al D'Amato in New York. Look at this. The better you thought the economy was, the more likely you were to vote for the Democrat for Congress, even though the Republicans control Congress. The economy saved Democrats like Feingold in Wisconsin, Boxer in California, Hollings in South Carolina, and the economy was a key factor in electing Gray Davis in California. One final point. Not all good news for the Democrats. Take a look at this. We asked voters, who would you vote for if you had a choice for president now between George W. Bush, the new governor re-elected of Texas, and Al Gore? Bush beats Gore by a pretty substantial margin. Jeff, I'm going to go to you, but I must first congratulate you. All our pundits' expectations were out of whack. The Democrats made gains. They predicted Republican gains for the House, for the Senate, and for governors. You were the only person that we spoke to who said you expected the Democrats to make gains in the House. So congratulations, and back to you.
That's what comes from knowing much less than anyone else who predicts. When we come back in a minute, we will visit once more Messrs. McCurry and Blankley and come back for some final thoughts. Before we go to our distinguished McCurry-Blankley duo, one more call to make. Get ready for this one. In Minnesota, in the governor's race, CNN projects that when all the votes are counted, Jesse Ventura, the Reform Party candidate, will be the next governor of Minnesota. He now has 37% of the vote, beating both St. Paul Mayor Norman Coleman and Hubert Humphrey III, Skip Humphrey. It's kind of hard to know what to say, except we have had enough surprises tonight to pack a barn. And here's the latest. Not just a wrestler, but a talk show host, and actually, to anyone who's been on his show, a guy who you might have expected would surprise people, but nothing like this. Congratulations, Governor-elect Jesse the Body Ventura. And now to Blankley and McCurry. Gentlemen, you want to analyze that result for us?
It's at the next National Governors Association meeting. He's going to go body slam all those moderates that we've been talking about tonight. That's what's going to happen.
Well, actually, you know, to be sort of half serious for a moment about him, he is the governor-elect. If you look at his message, it's a very populist message. It plays on all the cynicism the public has about elections. and politicians, and it plays in a state that has a long tradition of populism. So, you know, retrospectively at least, it all makes sense.
He had something to say. Look, the message tonight is that those candidates that went out and built an appeal not around negative attack ads, but gave people something positive to hold on to, maybe in addition to negative attack ads, really made some headway with voters. So it was an election in which, you know, I think the voters did tell us something about the kind of future that they want. And I suspect, since it's now on the East Coast the day after the election, we will all start talking about the campaign in the year 2000. I think it's abundantly clear that George W. Bush Jr., the newly re-elected governor of Texas, has a maybe front-runner status in the Republican side. He's got a message that is conservatism with a compassionate face, and it's quite clear that that's going to be appealing to a cross-section of Republicans, but probably not to the more idealistic right-wing Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Michael's right, and it's not just the voters in Capitol Hill, it's also the average primary Republican voter who is fairly conservative. Now, I think George W. Bush and Jeb Bush have a conservative message. I don't think they are anathema to conservatives at all, but you're going to see a number of other Republican candidates who are going to be running to their right. And the question that I think the party's going to face, and when a party starts losing elections in a row, like the Democrats did 3 presidencies, Republicans have now lost 2 presidencies in a row, and this unfortunate event tonight, they start looking for a winner. And that's why I think when you start looking at the poll numbers that Bush can draw against Gore, and then you start looking at the advantage his brother Jeb can do down in Florida in the primary process and sort of act as maybe a firewall and be a very strong support for him, I think this night ends up looking very good for George W.
Michael McCurry, let's look at the Democratic side for a moment. Is there anything in these results tonight that would give encouragement to those who are going to try to unseat Al Gore as the front runner for the next presidential campaign?
Well, I think the vice president comes through tonight's election results also as one of the real clear winners in the Democratic Party. He really went out, worked very, very hard on behalf of candidates, but we saw earlier in the evening Dick Gephardt, who really made, I think, a very passionate plea to listen carefully to what Democrats put forward as an agenda in this election. Certainly, both of those are going to be very carefully watched. My prediction on who the most popular newly elected Democratic governor will be, newly elected governor of Iowa, Tom Vilsack. I think all of these candidates are going to be making a quick journey out to pay a courtesy call on him. And on the subject of punditry, since we talked about that a little bit earlier, the political poop sheet hotline summed up 3 dozen of the great procrastinators in the chattering class and summarized their predictions. Guess what? The 10th grade class at Montgomery Blair High School out in suburban Maryland beat all of us. So hats off to them.
We're going to be booking them in about an hour and a half, I think, if we can get them to stay home from school. Gentlemen, the hour is late. We thank you for staying with us, staying the course, as Ronald Reagan's campaign used to say. And we will be back with a summation of summations in just a moment.
Some final thoughts now from we three who've spent several hours with you. It seems that when you vote, it counts. When you do not vote, you cannot count. This time, you have had the last word, the final word, not the politicians and certainly not the pundits. Our satisfaction has been simply reporting results to you.
Bernie, I would just add that there's something to me majestical when voters speak on Election Day. There is a sense that the nation has spoken, but in a very pragmatic sense, it seems to me it's not a surprise when incumbents do well, when the economy is doing as well as it is. We have an inflation rate in this country between 1 and 1.5%. The unemployment rate is 4%. We've had a growth in salaries and wages over the last few months, unlike anything we've seen in recent years. When people feel that comfortable, incumbents are going to do well.
And a word about what happened tonight. You know, we live in a time that's supposedly apolitical. People don't pay as much attention to politics as they used to. To some, it seems that those of us who like politics, even love politics, are kind of almost a dying breed. But for those who do find in politics this mixture of humor and high drama, of absurdity and high purpose, an election like tonight provides a magnificent lesson that no matter what we think we know, the voters always have the capacity to surprise us. On behalf of Judy and Bernard, we want to thank everybody behind us who made tonight's coverage as extensive and as thorough as it was. They have our heartfelt thanks with all the blood on the floor. And we want to leave you as we fade off into the sunset or perhaps sunrise with some sights and sounds of this remarkable election 98.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
On the Democratic side.
Okay, is that it for this camera?
I want to do 11, 12, and 13.
Okay, lower third right next time to roll eight.
News just ahead.
Roll eight.
This is wrong.
Does that look good, Susan? Is that okay?
This one's for yours. This is Tony. Hey, in regards to the meal package. Okay, we'll do 16 over 11 next for our timeline menu.
Left behind.
Goes move on Jim, move on 5, dissolve 5. Bernie reaches first base at 5, and Judy picks up on 3.
Q is large turnouts.
Got you. Beware the wrath of the American people. Start your move, Officer. Dissolve. Ready 5. Zoom 5. Dissolve 5. There, Mike's Q 'em, please.
Welcome to our election night nerve center.
This is being interpreted as the great impeachment election. Is it a referendum on impeachment? Well, if it is, the answer is no.
2-1, our voters said Clinton should not be impeached.
The campaigns now know, as the polls begin to start closing in the East, where the close races are, who's not voting. They're calling those homes, trying to the very last minute to get those people out to vote, because with low turnout, a couple hundred votes may shape an election, may shape control of Congress.
In just a few minutes, the first actual poll closings and the first actual results. We may be able to report them to you quickly, maybe not. Absolutely astonishing.
CNN is declaring a major upset in the South Carolina State House. In Connecticut, no surprise here.
68049 is wrong, Dave.
It is a pickup for the Democrats.
Yeah, well, it's about quarter up now.
I'm glad we did the Mausley-Brown conversation. We need to do more of that.
Fox is behind.
Remember that one. Do you want to do those 3?
Every close race is broken Democratic. If that trend continues, I think we're going to have to look at it and say there is some trend here. There is some broader message.
Let's do Senate first, Governor second, House third.
I've got to have, he wants this.
Why is this happening? Bill, what's the deal here? When?
You can't look at it to this minute. It's a long night. There are going to be races where there'll still be counting in the morning. When it's all over, we're going to have more Republicans in the House, more Republicans in the Senate.
Short and a rejoiner. Loan me